He scrutinized her, murmuring as if to himself that he seemed to have seen her somewhere before. Eugenia froze, the only thought in her mind being how things could have gone so wrong. He accused her icily of abducting the innocent children. This had happened not long ago at the Carrington estate. The maids were all hunched over, whispering about how the Marquis and Marchioness had vanished in a thin air, which was super strange. She gracefully reached for the sparkling jewels on the heavy curtains by the old window, then slid them into her sleeve with lightning speed. Only she knew the terrible truth that the masters of the estate were long gone, and the family was heading for complete ruin. The reason Eugenia was so sure of everything that was about to happen was because this world was just a novel she had read. Her own life had ended after a foolish fall down the stairs. As she took her last breath, she was completely engrossed in the fantasy novel The Unforgivable Sin. The next thing she knew, she woke up inside that very novel. The main character, Joshua von Keratin, was the heir to an ancient and powerful Marquis family with a long history. But from a young age, his life had been an endless series of misfortunes. He was tracking down the person who had ruined him, preparing to exact harsh revenge. The novel had ended abruptly mid-sentence, right at the moment Joshua's troubles began. The workers complained that due to the Marquis and Marchioness's disappearance, Keratin hadn't paid their wages. Joshua and his twin sister were sent to Selmia. The children weren't getting enough to eat, and no one cared for them. This really annoyed Eugenia, so she started secretly cooking for the twins, unable to forget Korean food. Leaving a tray of hot food at the children's door brought the beautiful woman a sliver of comfort. She had been helping the twins for several days, but the terrible rumors about death kept her from getting too close to them. Dying once was enough. She wasn't ready to kick the bucket again, so young. Eugenia decided to take the jewels and leave the estate to start over. The door was suddenly thrown open, and all the servants were ordered to gather in the main hall. The protagonist was thrilled the moment had finally arrived. The man told everyone to shut up, for he brought an important decree from the Duke himself. Since the Marquis's disappearance, his family had been struggling to get by. The heir is too young, so the Carrington estate will be taken over by the Duke's royal family, which means all of you servants are dismissed. This bombshell sent everyone into an uproar. Eugenia had expected all of this, but the key point was that they were kicking her out with nothing. Fortunately, her jewels were already safely hidden. Thankfully, no one cared about her, so she could finally get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow's sunrise meant a new beginning, and Eugenia was determined to escape this damned, fated romance plot for good. The morning of the long-awaited, crucial day finally arrived. She snapped her eyes open, which sparkled with unstoppable enthusiasm and the best mood ever. She stretched and whispered with satisfaction that she had finally had a sweet, sound sleep. This morning, accompanied by a fragrant cup of hot tea, was pleasant and peaceful. Just as Eugenia had predicted, the servants grabbed their things and hastily left the empty estate. So, it was time for Eugenia to leave. She vowed to start over, washing away the past with a pure heart. She left everything behind, yet in her hastily packed suitcase, she found only some basic clothes. A complex mix of surprise, painful realization, and pure fear flashed across the beautiful woman's face. She began to frantically search the room, desperate to find her priceless missing jewels. After a long and fruitless search, the beautiful woman realized with anguish that all her treasures had been ruthlessly stolen. But at this critical moment, she couldn't waste a single second. The girl rushed from one room to another, but unfortunately found nothing of value in any of them. She desperately needed to grab something, anything of value. Eugenia hurried to the Marchioness's room, sincerely hoping to find some valuables there. The previous owner of this cursed body had lived a lavish life, spending far beyond her means. The beautiful woman froze when a voice suddenly spoke up beside her, asking if she had a habit of taking things that didn't belong to her. The protagonist whipped around, staring in horror at the unexpected person. A serious-looking young boy was standing before her, arms crossed in a stern pose. Joshua von Keratin frowned and declared that he would accept no excuses. He confronted Eugenia, asking if she planned to abandon him too, just like the other servants. In this terrible situation, Eugenia had no idea what to do. She apologized and rushed for the exit, but the little boy grabbed her dress. He stopped her. Eugenia begged him to let her go, but Joshua suddenly announced he had something very important to say. The boy sank exhaustedly into a chair and then told the maid to do the same. But Eugenia politely refused, explaining that her status didn't allow it. Joshua immediately shouted, ordering her to sit, and the protagonist instantly obeyed. The young master confessed that he truly wanted to thank the maid for bringing them food all this time. Eugenia insisted it was nothing, that she was just doing her duty as an ordinary maid. The protagonist added that it had been her honor to work for the house of Marquis Carrington. She was about to leave the house, but little Joshua suddenly called out and stopped her. The young master clearly hadn't finished saying what was on his troubled mind. Do you think a commoner could disrespect a noble and go unpunished? Little Joshua snapped. In that instant, he realized how serious and reckless his words had been. He quickly said he didn't mean it that way, because she hadn't mocked them like the other servants. Eugenia could clearly sense the little boy's desperation, so she decided to hear him out and offer support one last time before leaving the estate for good. She knelt before him and whispered with a warm smile that it was okay, he could speak. The child confessed in a trembling voice that the Duke's knights could snatch him and his sister from the estate at any moment. They would be powerless to resist, and those people would control their lives as they pleased. Joshua also knew full well that in this terrible situation, no one would genuinely care about them. So to avoid that terrible fate, the twins desperately needed the maid's help. The young master, in a trembling voice, openly pleaded with Eugenia to become their legal guardian. Hearing this truly shocking news, the beautiful woman was stunned and speechless. The girl immediately asked in confusion if she had misheard, but Joshua assured her she had heard him perfectly. He decided to repeat his request and asked Eugenia to listen carefully, full of hope. Hearing the request from the young master's lips again sent the protagonist into a deep shock. The beautiful woman tried to explain that for an ordinary maid like her, accomplishing such a thing would be extremely difficult. Eugenia couldn't comprehend how desperate Joshua must be in this awful situation to make such an impossible request of a common maid. She decided to stop making lame excuses and confess everything to Joshua. Taking care of him and the young lady, while also hiding from the Duke, would require a large sum of money. But Eugenia hadn't received her meager salary for months. Not a single penny. If the young masters got sick or injured, she wouldn't be able to pay for a doctor or buy the medicine. Joshua completely understood what Eugenia was trying to tell him. The protagonist was about to add something very important, but a sudden wave of sympathy washed over her, leaving her speechless. So, Eugenia bowed respectfully and sincerely apologized to the young master for being unable to help. The one who was supposed to take the children away wasn't her, but Eileen Blair, the youngest daughter of a bankrupt baron. As a result, Eileen never found a match in high society, and after getting older, she threw herself into the humble job of a governess. Eventually, she found a position in the respected house of Marquis Carrington, and while teaching the twins, she formed a friendly relationship with them. However, 6 months ago, as the Marquis's financial situation worsened, Eileen was forced to leave her post. Then, Eileen found an ordinary job caring for an old woman in a remote area, far from her past life. Upon hearing the worrying news about the Marquis's family, she rushed back to see the children. This was why Eugenia couldn't take on the role of guardian. Otherwise, the story would irreversibly deviate from the plot she knew. Therefore, with a heavy heart, the maid firmly stated that her time here was over. She needed to leave. But suddenly, her ears caught a piercingly familiar alarm bell, shattering the silence of the estate. The bell was ringing, but Joshua was still here, and Eileen should have arrived much earlier. Eugenia decisively grabbed the young master's hand, breathlessly but insistently telling him to follow her. The child hesitated, confused by her sudden action, but Eugenia had no time to explain. Inside, the protagonist could already hear the ominous tolling of the bells clearly. Imagining herself lying in a dark coffin 6 feet under, Eugenia realized she absolutely could not let that happen. Joshua was stunned when a maid bluntly asked if he and the young lady were hiding in some kind of secret shelter. The child was confused as to how Eugenia knew, but she just pressed him demanding to know the exact location. It turned out that when the maid delivered their meals, she had noticed the twins secretly disappearing in some unknown direction. Mustering his last bit of courage, the boy asked in a trembling voice if she would agree to be their guardian if he told her the whole truth. The protagonist frantically grabbed her hair, desperately wrestling with painful doubts and internal conflict. Finally, she nodded decisively and, through gritted teeth, told the young master to hurry up. A brilliant smile bloomed on the child's face, but Eugenia had already resolved that once Eileen arrived, the children would go with her. Joshua grabbed the blonde's hand and blurted out excitedly that he trusted her completely. The secret hideout was very close, just a short walk straight ahead and then a turn at the next corner. Soon they arrived. The child stopped in front of an ordinary wall and said mysteriously that everything was hidden here. The protagonist raised an eyebrow, thinking, seriously, the secret hideout is in such an obvious place. Meanwhile, the child was busy quickly fiddling with something, and the secret hideout began to slowly open. Eugenia gasped, completely stunned, as a cleverly hidden secret room suddenly appeared before her. Her eyes immediately noticed toys, and even tiny crumbs left from eaten cookies. Joshua proudly asked what she thought, but she was unmoved. The adults had messed up, yet the innocent children were paying the price. The final bell rang, and Eugenia breathed a sigh of relief. The timing was perfect, as Eileen could show up at any moment. Joshua called her name again, and this time, the beautiful woman finally heard what he was saying. She gave him a nervous smile, trying to act calm, and quietly told the young master that everything was fine. But Eugenia's behavior seemed very strange to Joshua, and he even began to wonder if she was really listening. The children started to blame the blonde for acting so out of character, not understanding why all adults were so confusing. Eugenia's attention was drawn to the delicate face of the sleeping Miss Selmia. Fortunately, she didn't have to look for the girl for long. The young master quietly explained that his sister was sick, so he earnestly asked Eugenia not to wake her. Even before their father vanished without a trace, Joshua had promised him that he would definitely protect Sally. Even though their father was no longer around, the boy firmly believed he had to keep his promise. The protagonist was lost in thought. Even if this was just a novel, hadn't these little children been through enough? If she had possessed the body of a high society noblewoman instead of a common servant, would she still be helping these orphans? Joshua jumped, tensing up and whipping around when he heard a rustling sound behind him. He grabbed the hem of Eugenia's dress and admitted in a trembling voice that he was terrified she would run away. The protagonist gently explained that she had been standing too close to the sleeping young lady and was just carefully taking a step back so as not to wake her. Eugenia decided to move to the other side, and Joshua immediately volunteered to go with her, wanting to be closer. The young master didn't understand why the maid's laugh was so infectious, and the protagonist explained that he was very cute. Hearing these unexpected words, the child immediately blushed and then proudly declared that he wasn't cute at all, as he was past the age of looking cute. When Eileen arrived, the protagonist would no longer have the chance to see the young master's adorable face. Sadly, if Eugenia became an indispensable part of the story, something terrible might happen, so it was better to leave. This was exactly what was supposed to happen, but for some reason, Eileen still hadn't arrived, so the protagonist decided to wait a little longer. But time flew by, and as dusk approached, the long-awaited guest was still nowhere to be seen. Seeing Eugenia's haggard and worried face, the young master looked at her with some confusion. The protagonist couldn't hold it in any longer, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. At this moment, she was tormented by a painful question. Why hadn't Eileen come back for the children? Eugenia was really starting to panic. She didn't know what to do, as she was beginning to feel that Eileen wasn't coming back at all. The truth was, the young woman really didn't want to be responsible for the children because she was afraid of kicking the bucket again. But if she backed out and ran away now, these defenseless children might die alone. Eugenia turned to the young master, a determined look on her face, and told him firmly that she had something very important to tell him. She smiled at Joshua and asked if he happened to have any cash on him. Suddenly, the boy straightened up, his expression firm, and announced with dignity that he didn't want to ask for help for free either. Walking over to the sleeping Sally, Joshua carefully reached under her soft pillow, where something was clearly hidden. He then took out some jewelry set with sparkling gems and held it out, asking Eugenia to take it all. "Where did you get these treasures?" the protagonist asked the young master, her surprise evident. It turned out that Joshua had secretly hidden his mother's most valuable jewelry, so the other servants couldn't steal them. Eugenia couldn't accept them, as they were the only priceless things the twins' parents had left them. Moreover, the pieces were all finely engraved with a lily crest, the symbol of their noble family. Trying to sell these items would immediately mark them as stolen goods. But at that moment, Eugenia felt a ring in her hand set with a fake gem, which, as far as she knew, the Marquis had been tricked into buying. However, the protagonist couldn't bear to tell Joshua the cruel truth and hurt the innocent child's heart. The child declared that if Eugenia just took them to the Grand Ace Empire, to the mansion of the Duke of Horus, then the jewels would be hers. Joshua added pleadingly that the former Duchess was their beloved grandmother's own sister. The protagonist gently returned the jewelry to the young master. Then, with a relieved and encouraging smile, she said that one ring was more than enough for her, much to the child's surprise. Eugenia solemnly promised that she would definitely bring the young master to the Duke of Horus's estate. The boy's face immediately lit up, radiating pure joy. The heroes made a pinky promise, solemnly sealing their commitment to each other in this way. But suddenly, Joshua pulled his hand back and unexpectedly suggested drawing up a written contract right away. He quickly found a clean sheet of paper in the room and, with a sly and expectant smile, asked Eugenia to sign. The protagonist had a strange feeling she was being tricked and asked in confusion if it was really necessary to sign this. When Eugenia's eyes fell on the penalty of a whopping 1,000,000 gold coins, she couldn't hide her genuine shock. "You're not just going to abandon us and leave, are you?" Joshua asked with feigned sadness. The protagonist, terrified, hastily signed the contract to keep the young master from crying. Then, after carefully confirming all the details, she dramatically handed the contract back to the child. But before letting go completely, Eugenia said very seriously that she had one main condition. Eugenia wanted the young master to call her sister from now on, and nothing else. She explained that they needed to be prepared for any crazy things that might happen, so they would pretend to be siblings. But if he wasn't willing, Eugenia would leave. But Joshua immediately shouted that he agreed, then looked a little embarrassed. He called her sister. Eugenia cheered, saying they could get ready to leave right away, as there was no time to waste. After what felt like an endless journey, the heroes finally reached a small village near the border. The protagonist had to sell off everything left in the mansion. She needed to find a village where they could slip across the Empire's border without any trouble. The children were calling each other by their old names, completely forgetting their new ones. Shushu and Sally. But in the novel, it described a ruthless killer who recognized the twins, suddenly attacked them, and coldly murdered Eileen. This was why Eugenia had suggested adding a key clause to the agreement. The twins had to pretend she was their sister, so it was decided to use fake names. The moment Eugenia heard them call her name, she immediately dropped everything she was doing. The children's hair was now dark, but Joshua was worried about only one thing. Would the color wash out? She gently explained that even if the color didn't fade right away, their hair would definitely grow back, so there was nothing to worry about. The boy curiously asked where Eugenia was going, and she simply explained that she was going to earn some money. She couldn't reveal the truth about the fake ring, so she cleverly told the little gentleman that it was always good to have more money. Joshua crossed his arms over his thin chest and replied importantly that he already knew that. Selmia suddenly jumped excitedly towards the protagonist, asking if she could go with her, saying she was bored to death. Her overprotective brother hadn't even let her open a window before. The protagonist earnestly promised the girl that she would work extra hard today to make sure she got her favorite candy. Selmia assured her new sister that she would wait patiently. Eugenia gently stroked the little girl's soft hair, calling her a smart little darling with a tender smile. Although the protagonist promised to be back as soon as possible, the thought of bribes, the children's medicine, food, and rent already had her exhausted. Eugenia realized she was nearly broke. Thus, driven by desperation, Eugenia headed straight for the job board, looking for any work she could find. The innkeeper waved a dismissive hand, pointing Eugenia toward a rickety old board covered in notices. The protagonist walked purposefully to the board and began to carefully examine every available job. There was a wide variety of work, but unfortunately, most of it was beyond Eugenia's abilities or what her circumstances allowed. Furthermore, Eugenia suddenly realized the room had gone silent, and she could feel everyone's eyes fixed on her. The young woman grew nervous and quickly pulled her hood over her head. The room filled with chatter again, and Eugenia immediately felt a wave of relief. She frantically started searching for a decent job, but none of them paid more than a paltry 5 gold coins. Suddenly, Eugenia's attention was drawn like a moth to a flame by a worn-out notice in the corner. The client was looking for a maid to accompany them to the Ace Empire, promising generous pay based on distance, with room for negotiation. This was exactly what Eugenia needed. She showed the notice to the innkeeper and firmly stated that she wanted the job. The bearded man raised his eyebrows in surprise, shocked that such a fragile-looking girl would dare to take on such a significant task. Since no one had applied for a whole month, the guy was considering taking the ad down, but luckily, the young lady showed up just in time. The innkeeper said the position still hadn't been filled. The guy told me he tried desperately to figure out why they weren't hiring, but came up with nothing. Since she had no other choice, our girl was fully prepared. Upon arriving at the destination, Eugenia told the woman she wanted to see Mr. Elvery, and the woman told her to follow. On the way, the housekeeper kindly said that if she was actually hired, she would be genuinely happy for her. The woman led Eugenia to the correct room and warned her that it might get loud, so she'd better cover her ears. Then she suddenly started banging on the door and shouting, demanding that Mr. Elvery open up. Soon, a sleepy-looking guy with glasses appeared at the door, rubbing his eyes and asking what was going on. This guy named Elvery immediately smiled warmly and introduced himself upon hearing she was there for the ad. The protagonist introduced herself as well, but she was surprised to find that her employer was much younger than she had imagined. Elvery pointed to the door and suggested they go inside the room first. Eugenia agreed, but the moment she stepped into the room, she couldn't hide her genuine surprise and slight shock at the sight. The place was an absolute pigsty. The employer, clearly embarrassed, apologized to the lady for the mess. He started looking for the best seat, finally saying she could just sit wherever was comfortable. Then the interview began. First, Elvery asked in a serious tone if she was absolutely sure what job she was applying for. Not backing down, the protagonist replied that they needed a maid to accompany them to the Ace Empire. The man confirmed the information, adding that no matter how close the country was, they would have to cross the border. But this wasn't a problem for Eugenia, which surprised the man, as people usually avoided long-distance assignments. The girl told Elvery not to worry, as she already had a job lined up in the Ace Empire anyway. The man frowned slightly, learning that this would be her first time traveling to that distant place. The protagonist proudly declared that she had extensive experience in serving masters, so she wouldn't lose to anyone in that regard. A determined fire burned in Eugenia's eyes. She was ready to showcase her unique skills from modern Korean society. With a brilliant smile, Elvery unexpectedly announced that he was hiring her. The protagonist hadn't expected the entire hiring process to go so smoothly. The guy explained that they were leaving soon and had no other candidates, so he was in a difficult position. Eugenia asked if she could bring her younger brother and sister, as they had no other guardian. Elvery thought for a moment, then gave an unexpected answer. It wasn't a decision he could make alone. The protagonist looked at her employer with a suspicious gaze. The man said she could go see the master now and explain her request. It was only then that Eugenia realized he wasn't the employer. As she walked up the creaky stairs, the girl asked if there was anything she should be aware of. Elvery said I shouldn't pry into the boss's private life or bother him. The whole thing was strange. The interview was too easy. They didn't ask me many questions, and they've been trying to fill this position for a while. Elvery knocked on the door and, without waiting for an answer, pushed her into the room, catching her off guard. The protagonist gave a foolish smile and quickly apologized for her clumsiness. It was so dark inside that she couldn't see anything, not even a shadow. The curtains were completely drawn, obscuring everything. It seemed the employer was a nocturnal creature. Suddenly, a deep male voice told her there was a chair in front of her and that she could sit. The protagonist did as she was told, then introduced herself, saying she was here to apply for the maid position. The man, shrouded in darkness, said nothing, so she grew a little bolder and asked what she should call him. The real employer finally answered that his name was Henrik. The protagonist asked with a glimmer of hope if she could bring her twin younger siblings on the trip, as the lady promised to work for even the lowest salary if the master would allow it. Henrik lit a candle. The room was instantly filled with a soft glow, and Eugenia could clearly see the strong, masculine silhouette of a dark-haired man. Words caught in her throat, and the protagonist couldn't tear her eyes away from this incredibly handsome man. Meanwhile, Henrik slowly put on his gloves, but even this ordinary action seemed filled with an indescribable charm to Eugenia. Eugenia thought that if she had a face like that, her mood would improve every time she looked in the mirror. But the girl didn't understand why Henrik approached her without a word, getting closer and closer until he stopped in front of her. The man said thoughtfully that her face looked familiar, as if they had met before. Eugenia covered her mouth with her hand, looking at the man in admiration, thinking this must be some clever pickup technique. But considering Henrik's cold and weary eyes, the girl's bold guess proved to be wrong. The heroine said no in a defeated voice, while the man immediately pressed her on why her face looked so familiar. Henrik was certain he had seen her somewhere before, and then he remembered. The man said in a cold, calm tone that she was the one who brought trouble to the children. The heroine was furious that Mr. Henrik would suddenly accuse her of such a terrible thing. But the man didn't understand how the girl could be so unaware, since she was wanted and her picture was posted everywhere. Eugenia tried to explain that she had never done such a thing, but Henrik had no intention of judging whether the accusations were true. However, she was rejected for the job, especially since it was such an important one. If what the handsome man said was true, the heroine had no idea what she would do. Just then, Henrik noticed the girl clenching her slender hands in a fists out of helplessness and anger. Eugenia turned around, saying she completely understood Mr. Henrik's position and would leave immediately. But before leaving, the girl mustered her courage and decided to ask just one crucial question. Would he report her visit? She reminded him that she had a younger brother and sister. The girl pleaded with him for a little time, knowing full well she had to protect Joshua and Selmia. Suddenly, Henrik announced that he would not report her to the authorities. He flatly refused to get involved in other people's messy, complicated affairs. In exchange, Eugenia had to do him a favor. The handsome man wanted her not to reveal the location of this place. Got it, Eugenia answered briefly, then hurriedly left the mysterious room. It seemed this guy was afraid of something too. Fortunately, he wouldn't turn her in, so Eugenia decided to leave this place as soon as possible. As she went downstairs, she ran into Mr. Elvery and told him their collaboration was off. The man was stunned, his face a picture of utter surprise at the lady's rejection. "This is terrible," the man groaned, and Eugenia felt he was more upset than she was. Eugenia bid the man farewell, wishing him a good and peaceful day as usual. Elvery decided he'd had enough of this nonsense and stormed straight into his boss's room. He angrily declared that, especially at a time like this, there was no time to deal with such a rejection. Elvery desperately wanted to understand the reason, and Henrik calmly explained that the young woman was wanted by the authorities. The assistant was shocked by this unexpected answer and visibly flinched. Elvery refused to believe it was true. The lady herself had mentioned a younger brother and sister. Could they be the innocent children she had cruelly snatched away? But it was obvious they couldn't have anything to do with someone accused of such a serious crime. Nevertheless, it was still distressing. They should have left Halland sooner, but all the city borders were tightly sealed. The reason they sealed the borders was that the deposed Duke soldiers were still out there without any protection. As a result, border security became stricter and more thorough than ever. Furthermore, all the local merchants wanted to get out as soon as possible, trying to save their assets in this chaotic situation. Two foreigners joining forces would inevitably attract a high level of vigilance from the authorities. They were too short-staffed to handle all the work, so they decided to find one more person. There was a huge bounty on this girl, and the wanted poster had even reached this remote backwater. Elvery deduced that the girl wasn't just hiding from some ordinary person, but from someone with immense power. The trouble she would bring would far outweigh her worth, and Henrik didn't have time for that. The dark-haired man was startled when his assistant slapped a formal document on the table, demanding he hire Miss Eugenia and sign it. Henrik said sharply, "Are you even listening to me?" But Elvery pointed out that since she was wanted, she would be extra careful with her every word and action. He reminded Henrik that he had always been a formidable character whose clever plans had never failed, so they could perfectly well use each other to get what they needed. The dark-haired man sighed heavily, saying he shouldn't have given Elvery the chance to say those things in the first place. He couldn't deny that if they delayed any longer, the situation would only get worse, much worse. In the end, Henrik compromised, agreed, and immediately announced they were going after her right away. Elvery jumped for joy, while the dark-haired man wondered if he should reconsider the decision. A short while later, the heroine unexpectedly came across her own wanted poster. Every word the handsome man had said was true. She was now the #1 most wanted person in the entire region. But luckily, no one in this small village recognized her. The wanted poster didn't mention Joshua or Selmia, which she found very strange and illogical. You would think they'd mention the children in a case like this, but they were only looking for Eugenia, which was too fishy. Whatever the real reason was, the top priority was to hide the twins in a safe place. After throwing away the suspicious flyer, the heroine felt a sliver of much-needed relief. Just as she was about to leave, she overheard some people talking about a wanted poster for the Duke's heir. The posters plastered everywhere promised a huge fortune to whoever could take out the kidnapper and bring back her head. The bounty was ridiculously high, a full 1 million shiny gold coins. Eugenia rushed out into the pouring rain. Things were getting tricky, and she needed to leave this town as soon as possible. She suddenly remembered her promise of candy to Selmia, but wandering around in such a dangerous place was just crazy. A cruel tug-of-war raged in her chaotic mind. She gave in and ran to find a candy store, completely unaware that unseen dark figures were already following her. 2 burly men walked into a tavern and immediately announced they were looking for someone. Elvery threw back his hood, and the innkeeper immediately recognized him. He briefly explained that they needed the name of the mysterious blonde woman who had been there that morning. It turned out the lady had unfortunately not registered here. Her name wasn't in the register. Elvery angrily accused the man of stalling for time, until the innkeeper blurted it out. She was just here. The men immediately stopped arguing and stared at the innkeeper with looks of extreme interest. The owner clarified that she had left only about 10 minutes ago. The heroine spun around when she heard hurried footsteps coming toward her. The men quickly subdued her, certain they had caught the wanted criminal from the bounty poster. The delicate beauty looked nothing like a kidnapper, but the temptation of 1 million gold coins left no choice. A price was a price. When Eugenia woke up, it was to the sound of the thugs frantically arguing over how to divide the promised bounty. Her fingers touched a small but sturdy bag. Noticing the movement, the man grabbed her arm and told her to stop pretending to be weak and helpless. Suddenly, he let go, clutching his eyes and screaming his lungs out, and our girl took the opportunity to escape. His companion yelled after Eugenia that if he caught her, she was dead. She thought she'd be safe once she ran out of the alley, but then she ran head first into a tall figure. For a moment, she had no idea what was happening. Fear froze her to the spot. Standing before her was a tall, cloaked figure with sharp blue eyes. Eugenia's eyes filled with raw, animalistic fear. She shot off like an arrow from a bow, ignoring the man in the dark cloak's shouts for her to stop. The moment he grabbed her wrist, she was terrified and started to scream. She begged him to let go. When his hood slipped off and Eugenia recognized Henrik's familiar face, she was stunned. She was angry that the handsome man had promised not to turn her in. But just then, her relentless pursuers jumped out from around the corner. Seeing her with him, they immediately shouted that they had already called dibs on this precious prey. If the dark-haired man had caught her, they would pay him, because Eugenia was a tricky catch and couldn't be allowed to slip away. She was taken aback when Henrik suddenly told her to get down, warning that things were about to get very dangerous. Then, firmly yet gently, he pulled the frightened blonde close, pressing her against his broad chest. When Eugenia saw the gun in his hand, she froze, her heart racing. The thugs just laughed arrogantly, thinking the dark-haired man was just pulling some lame trick. They had no idea just how determined Henrik was. So when he shot one of the pursuers in the arm, the laughter died on their lips. The guy just screamed, terrified by the intense pain. Both men collapsed, passing out from extreme fear, and the street finally fell silent. Henrik looked at Eugenia and asked if she was all right. She said she was fine in a trembling voice. She wondered why this man had been so desperate to find her, even bringing a loaded gun. It even has a silencer, Eugenia whispered, completely stunned. Henrik raised an eyebrow, surprised that she even knew what a silencer was. Eugenia explained that it reduces the sound of the gunshot, and he realized she knew a lot about weapons, but noble ladies weren't usually interested in such things. She replied that she had no noble blood at all. Henrik couldn't tell if she was playing dumb or was genuinely clueless. Only a few people knew about this new type of weapon, yet an ordinary maid knew about a handgun that had only recently been developed. This was too fishy. Eugenia began to thank her savior, but Henrik cut her off, saying he was here to hire her. He decided to explain the details on the way, so he told her to keep up with him. Thinking it over again, Henrik realized there was no guarantee this move wouldn't cause more trouble. Elvery wouldn't let it go, and considering Eugenia's situation, this decision seemed to be the best and most appropriate one. This formidable man wanted to use her, but she had no other choice, as a better opportunity might never come again. So, with a heavy heart, Eugenia agreed to do exactly as he said. She froze when he looked like he wanted to add something, but he immediately began to falter, unexpectedly losing his nerve. Henrik turned, got down on one knee, and humbly asked her to be his wife. Eugenia took this very seriously and immediately began to explain that they had only just met and that she had 2 young children. Henrik asked her to hear him out and explained that the situation was not good, as not many people were crossing the border anymore. The heroine's heart sank, guessing that soon all roads out of the country might be blocked. So, for now, the safest method was to pretend to be a family. To avoid suspicion during inspections, they needed to play the part of a married couple. The protagonist decided to meet up later that day. Eugenia was almost taken out because she was marked as a person of high interest. When he asked if the children with her were, kidnapped, it sounded too crazy. But luckily, the guy believed her. Eugenia reached for the doorknob with a trembling hand, but then she clutched it tightly to her chest, trying to calm herself so she wouldn't tremble in front of the children. The girl mustered her courage, walked into the room, and asked with a smile if the twins had been waiting for her. Seeing the promised candy, Selmia beamed from ear to ear and skipped over to the girl. The heroine apologized that the candy had gotten a bit damp, but the little girl just smiled and said it was perfectly fine. The children noticed the scratches on their sister's hands, and Eugenia explained that she had just fallen on the road. Joshua immediately began examining the heroine's hand, asking worriedly what had happened. Eugenia apologized to the twins for worrying them. Then she told Selmia in a gentle voice to eat the candy to cheer herself up. Joshua suddenly frowned slightly and asked Eugenia if she was working with that tall man. The heroine realized the young master must have seen her employer from the window. But as soon as Joshua heard that Eugenia wasn't sure who she was working for, he started scolding her for being too careless. Selmia, not waiting for the argument to end, told her brother that their sister was much better than him because he had no social skills. Eugenia suppressed a laugh and jokingly told him to stop picking on Josh, and the boy immediately interjected that he was just worried about her. The heroine felt she had to stop teasing the young master, or he would really pout and get angry. Eugenia knelt beside Joshua, looked into his eyes, and promised she would keep their promise at all costs. Even if he pretended to be mature, he was still a child, after all. Now, the heroine decided to explain the job to the twins. Since the border might close soon, they first needed to leave the duchy as quickly as possible. They needed to go to the inn where her employer was staying right away. The children started to get ready, while Eugenia remembered something important she had to say. Then, in an excited tone, she happily blurted out that she was married. "What did you say?" Joshua asked, completely bewildered. Meanwhile, Selma excitedly repeated the heroine's words. The boy froze like a marble statue, a bag of candy slipping from his hand. "Did you just say husband?" Joshua exploded. Selma immediately began to congratulate her sister, her eyes sparkling with joy, asking if her future husband was handsome. But Joshua wouldn't let it go, not understanding how Eugenia could go out looking for a job and come back with a husband. The heroine tried to stay calm and explained that due to certain circumstances, she would have a temporary husband, but it was just an act. They had to pretend to be married for a few days as part of the deal with her employer, which would make their escape safer and easier. Even though they had to play house, at least they could leave the duchy without any trouble. Eugenia was worried about the twins' identities being exposed, so they needed to be extra careful. "Let's just hang in there a little longer," the girl said, enveloping the twins in her gentle embrace, warming them. After a moment, there was a knock on the door, and Eugenia calmly said she would get it, as it was likely her employer. This guess was confirmed, as Elvery and Henrik were standing right there. The dark-haired man asked if she was ready, his gaze immediately moving downward. The heroine was surprised to see the twins right beside her. Henrik mused that the dark hair would definitely work. Elvery explained that he had been worried about what to do if the children looked too different, as it could mess up the whole plan. If you look closely, Eugenia's brother has a similar vibe to Henrik, and people would believe he was a child. Joshua told her that the marriage was fake, but she never said he had to be someone else's son, and he was angry. Henrik didn't care if the boy wanted to be his fake son or not. He just wanted everything to go smoothly. Joshua averted his gaze and said he could play the son, but why did the father have to be the dark-haired man? The child pointed at Elvery and shouted with childish innocence that this unreliable-looking guy could do it too. Henrik said thoughtfully that the boy wasn't as patient as he'd thought. Then he added that it was only for a few days, just for show. When Henrik saw someone getting in the way, saying they couldn't handle something, he would start to doubt if he had the patience to deal with it. Those words stung the child deeply, and he immediately shouted that there was nothing he couldn't handle. Joshua told the dark-haired man to just wait and see how perfectly he would play the role of his son, showing off his confidence. The heroine was surprised at how smoothly Henrik handled Joshua. Although they were a bit late, it was the perfect time to introduce themselves, as they would be spending some time together. Sally took a step forward, gave an elegant curtsy, stated her name, and asked them to please take care of her. Her movements were full of grace. Eugenia wanted to introduce Joshua, but the boy declared that the men didn't need to know. The heroine knew the boy hated being called by a nickname, but now he was showing no manners at all. Since Joshua refused to be his son, Eugenia sadly announced she would leave alone. Hearing this, the boy immediately bowed, introduced himself to the two gentlemen, and called himself Shoo Shoo. The men returned the bow, and Elvery smiled, saying it was a very cute name. He then offered to help the lady with her luggage, but Eugenia quickly replied that it was fine, she couldn't trouble him with such trivial matters. Joshua crossed his arms like a little adult and told Eugenia to give him the suitcase instead of trying to drag two at once. Henrik also had his code of honor, so he gentlemanly took the heroine's hand luggage, freeing her hands. Eugenia tried to object, as Henrik didn't have to do that, but his determination was unshakable. But Joshua interrupted her, asking if he could hold her hand now that she wasn't carrying anything. Selma ran up from the other side and asked with childish innocence if she could hold her hand too. Soon, the group arrived at their destination. Sally was excited about her new room, while Joshua said skeptically that it was nothing special. Henrik told the lady to come to his room after she finished unpacking. When they were alone, Elvery said he suspected Eugenia had kidnapped the children, and the dark-haired man agreed. The man suggested they drop the subject, and the assistant agreed, glad they would soon be leaving the godforsaken place of Hallen. "We need to hurry," Henrik replied to his friend. Shortly after, the heroine knocked on the door, and a smiling Elvery appeared at the entrance. Eugenia apologized, saying the children wanted to come with her, so they all came. Joshua declared in a serious tone that they were perfectly capable of attending this meeting. Elvery said it was no problem and invited everyone in with a charming smile. Everyone's roles were simple. Henrik and Eugenia were husband and wife, the twins were their children, and it was decided that Elvery would be both the butler and the coachman. Just in case, the dark-haired man suggested changing the children's names to shake off anyone who might be following them. Selma raised her hand and asked to be called Sally, while Joshua thought for a moment and asked to be called Shoo. Henrik nodded in agreement with the names. Elvery suggested that Miss Eugenia also think of a name for herself, or choose one she often used. The heroine suggested the name Genya, but it was too close to her real name, so Henrik told her to change it. The young woman thought for a moment and suggested the name Harry, which the man agreed to approvingly. He stood before her, called her by her new name, and held out his hand, asking for her kind cooperation. Perhaps because it had been so long ago, the girl felt awkward when this old name was brought up again. She extended her hand in response, also asking for Henrik's kind cooperation. Henrik decided to confirm with Miss Harry if it was a nickname, but the girl said it wasn't, but that she could respond to the name quickly. It was the name she had been called her entire previous life. "Harry," the man called, and she responded immediately. "Looks like we're ready." Now that everything was arranged, Elvery said he would go forge their identification documents. Eugenia leaned down to the children and explained that they had to call her mom. Selma excitedly raised her hand and shouted that she would do her best. Joshua also gave a more reserved promise. Suddenly, someone started banging violently on the door, which made our girl jump. Was this person here for her? The men exchanged a look and nodded in silent understanding. "Who is it?" Elvery asked as he walked to the door. He heard a woman's voice from the other side. He opened the door and saw the landlady. She hadn't found him on the second floor, so she came up to the third, even though he had asked her not to. The woman explained that something had come up, so she really had no choice. It turned out she had burned her hand and couldn't make dinner, but but she offered to let us use her kitchen. The heroine felt a wave of relief, realizing she had been nervous for nothing. Elvery told the landlady he couldn't cook, but Eugenia immediately interjected that she would handle it. She then asked the children what kind of snack they wanted. Sally began to rattle off a long list, but her brother immediately told her to be quiet and pick the one thing she wanted most. So, the little one chose pancakes with lots of cream. The heroine promised to make them and told them to wait patiently. But after a while, Eugenia still couldn't figure out what was happening. Why would Henrik offer to help and even put on a pink apron with a teddy bear pattern? It raised so many questions for her. The man noticed Eugenia's stare and pointed it out. She immediately got flustered and said she was just spacing out. The lady tried to tell Henrik that he really didn't have to help. The man was chopping vegetables like a total professional chef, saying it would be much faster if they did it together. This man seriously exceeded all of the heroine's expectations. Once everything was ready, the girl called the children to the table. In such a short time, they had managed to make several high-class dishes that now adorned the table. Sally was very excited, but Henrik told her to eat slowly or she'd get a stomachache. Joshua suddenly snapped out of his thoughts and decided to ask the man a question. He knew things had been a bit crazy lately, but the boy didn't understand why Henrik was so sure the border was going to close. Joshua turned to Eugenia and asked if she knew anything. It turned out that after the previous duke's death last year, the Duchy of Halland had split into two factions. The former ruler's illegitimate son, Benjamin, impersonated the heir, Shigel, and stole the throne. After seizing power, he was said to have become the Duke's puppet. The situation only got worse until the protagonists were caught. Just then, several marquises who didn't belong to any faction went missing. A smart person like Joshua could easily connect the dots, Henrik explained. There had been a recent surge in criminal activity, which was why they needed identification documents. But even so, two adult men would still arouse suspicion, so they came up with the idea of creating the image of a wholesome family. He and his wife, Harry, had returned to the duchy to spend his father's last moments with him. Joshua irritably corrected Henrik at once, pointing out that the wife was fake. The dark-haired man explained that this was enough to explain why Ace's people were in the duchy and trying to cross the border. The boy was surprised when Henrik suddenly shoved a large piece of meat onto his plate and told him to eat it. The man explained it would help him grow big and strong, but Joshua hissed like a feral cat that he could take care of himself. Elvery said it would take up to a week to forge Miss Eugenia's identification documents. Also, they were meeting with some merchants tomorrow afternoon to arrange a fitting. Her travel attire had to be sorted out because the way she looked now, Eugenia wouldn't pass for a noble. Since she was to play Henrik's wife, we need high-quality fabrics, the kind that screams wealth, so no one will question her. The matching jewelry is the last and trickiest part. With the children, we have to be careful when looking around. Matching jewelry is important, like a wedding ring. It's a necessity for weddings on this continent. So Eugenia must wear some very expensive jewelry, but getting a hold of something like that quickly is a hassle. She knew this, so she told the men she could take care of the matching jewelry. She said she had some left by her late parents. The men asked to see it, and Eugenia said they would have to wait a bit. Joshua was startled when Eugenia suddenly knocked on the door. As soon as she entered, the heroine announced she had a favor to ask. Eugenia felt awkward, but she mustered her courage and asked Joshua to lend her his brooch and pendant. They needed them so she and Henrik could pose as a married couple. The boy's eyes widened as the young woman apologized for making such a request. The child immediately said it was no big deal and handed his late parents' jewelry to the heroine. Eugenia hugged the boy tightly and promised she would take good care of them and return them soon. Joshua, caught off guard, quickly pulled away and wished the heroine a good trip tomorrow. The next day, Henrik and Eugenia set off for the city. A consultant happily greeted the esteemed guests, saying they had been waiting for them. Precious fabrics, specially imported from overseas, were already prepared for our protagonists. The salesperson just didn't understand why people were still shopping. To buy morning clothes, the heroine burst into tears on the spot. Enrico looked completely terrified and immediately snapped that the salesperson's attitude towards customers was far too casual. Eugenia softly explained that her father had recently passed away, so she was still grieving. As she started to cry again, the salesperson was instantly flustered. Enrico grabbed the heroine's hand and dramatically announced that he would always be by her side, and she thanked him for his support. The salesperson began to apologize for his terrible mistake. Eugenia said it was no big deal and that she just wanted to look at the clothes. The shop assistants immediately went into overdrive, quickly showing her top-tier fabrics she was sure to love. First, they needed to take her measurements, so they asked the heroine to stand up. But Eugenia hadn't anticipated this at all. Under her cloak, she was wearing old clothes, definitely not the kind a noble lady would wear, which could raise some suspicions. Henrik immediately interjected, telling them to skip the measurements, saying there was no need to measure his wife. The salesperson explained that a ready-made dress might not fit well, but the black-haired man explained that his wife was expecting their third child. Our heroine was completely confused, but just played along, confirming the information. But the moment she processed it, she gave Henrik a look of complete shock. The man suddenly smiled gently and said the child would surely be as lovely as her. Our heroine blushed furiously, and the salesperson thought to himself, "My goodness, making money is hard." He asked the couple to wait a moment while he went to wrap up the clothes. The moment they were alone, our heroine turned to Henrik. She jumped in surprise, blurting out that they had never talked about having a third child. The man stood up and said he was also surprised that she cried, but she handled it like a professional actress. Henrik took Eugenia's hand, praised her, and told her to keep it up. The heroine blushed and promised she would do her best. As soon as her heroes returned, Elvery dropped a bombshell. They were in trouble. He had forged the identification documents faster than expected, but couldn't get a marriage certificate. Things were a mess, and even a master craftsman wanted to escape Halland, so he requested to go with them. Henrik thought for a moment and said that in that case, they would also lay down some conditions. First, they would part ways as soon as they were outside the city gates. Second, Henrik would set the departure date. If the master didn't agree, the deal was off. The heroine knocked on the twins' door and went in to tell them they were leaving tomorrow afternoon. The children immediately perked up, and Joshua asked if they would ditch those guys as soon as they were out of the city gates. But Eugenia said no, as that might look suspicious. They would part ways after reaching the Ace Empire. The carriage journey would take about a day, so the heroine told the children to change into their pajamas and then go to sleep. A little later, Sally changed into her bunny pajamas and immediately asked her sister if the outfit looked good on her. Joshua, wearing cat pajamas, was frustrated because they looked too childish. The heroine smiled and told the children to hurry to sleep because she was about to turn off the lights. Joshua and Sally lay on either side of Eugenia, and as soon as she wished them good night, they fell asleep instantly. But the heroine herself couldn't fall asleep. When she realized it was futile, she sat up in bed. The heroine seriously doubted whether she could successfully play her part tomorrow, and that was why she couldn't sleep. Nevertheless, Eugenia was certain that no matter what happened, she would protect the twins from any danger. The young woman took out a brooch and gazed at the gem that shimmered beautifully in the moonlight. Then she suddenly felt the urge to step out onto the balcony. The moment she stepped outside, the cool, fresh air enveloped her. But then Eugenia spotted someone, and a look of confusion immediately crossed her face. It was Henrik training down below. It seemed he couldn't sleep either. Even though he always looked exhausted, they had to leave tomorrow, and Eugenia wondered if he was all right. Seeing the girl, Henrik asked her why she was up so late. Eugenia was startled and explained that she just wanted to get some fresh air. The man smiled warmly and told her to go to sleep. After wishing her good night, he also told her not to be late tomorrow. Eugenia smiled at this, but back in her room, she felt ashamed, as if she had gotten away with something she shouldn't have done. The next day, our heroine changed into her morning clothes and asked the twins if they were ready to go. Sally excitedly told her mother she was ready, but Joshua just wanted to get it over with. Like a true gentleman, Elvery offered his hand to young Miss Sally and helped her into the carriage. Joshua only snapped out of his trance of staring at the horses when Elvery called his name. Just then, a cloaked man approached our heroes. Henrik turned to his wife and told her this man would be escorting them. Our heroine nodded and asked him to take good care of them. Henrik said that he and Elvery would ride on horseback beside the carriage, and if anything happened, she just had to open the window. Then, the black-haired man helped his wife into the carriage. Finally, after so long, the carriage reached the location. Our heroine looked determined, but deep down she still felt anxious and uneasy. Still, as long as they could get past these nights at the city gate, they would reach the Ace Empire. The knights shouted that no one was allowed to leave the land now, ordering the carriage to turn back immediately. Henrik calmly explained that they were nobles from the Ace Empire who needed to return home. The black-haired man mentioned that rumor has it the royal family of the Ace Empire always takes extra care of their people. The captain of the guard stepped forward and demanded that the heroes present their identification documents. Baron Henrik Tryson, with a flick of his wrist, immediately presented his official documents for a thorough inspection. The black-haired man explained that he was here to pick up his wife and children, who were visiting her family home. The captain dryly announced that he was going to take a quick look inside the carriage. The knight yanked open the carriage door and bluntly asked the lady what business had brought them to Halland. The heroine calmly explained that she had received the worrying news that her father was gravely ill, so she had come as quickly as possible. When asked directly for her maiden name, Eugenia gave the resounding name of Harleplan. The captain inquired how long she had been married, and the girl answered confidently without hesitation that it had been 8 years. It seemed Baron Henrik's conversation with the guards at the gate was proceeding rather quickly and smoothly. But the persistent captain of the guard seemed to have one last request. He suddenly demanded that the lady remove her veil so he could get a clear look at her face. Eugenia thought to herself, is this guy really ignoring all etiquette, being so insensitive to a person in mourning? The heroine was caught off guard and didn't know what to do. She was terrified that she was about to be exposed. The guards were hunting for the Duke's heir, so why did the captain want to verify her appearance? She was just a girl. Could he already know that she had been wanted throughout Halland for a long time? Mom, are you okay? The children asked with concern, seeing Eugenia suddenly become flustered. The heroine came to her senses, realizing she had to pull herself together now. She told the children she was fine, explaining that she just wanted to put on her best face for them. The captain visibly jumped when the lady suddenly called out his name, sharply and imperiously. The heroine coldly asked if the man was prepared to take full responsibility for what was happening. If she were to remove her hat, as he had shown no respect even after seeing the identification documents, while she was trying to remain composed for the children's sake. The Baroness suddenly demanded that they immediately fetch someone of a much higher rank than the captain. The noblewoman was about to report the guard's rudeness, and was even prepared to remove her hat, just as he had so arrogantly demanded. Above the captain were the head of security and the lord, so they could be facing more than just a minor punishment. The guards all surrounded her, bowing and pleading for her to stop, saying the inspection was over and apologizing profusely. The heroine ordered the coachman to drive on at once. The moment the carriage door closed, Eugenia felt a great weight lift from her shoulders. Thank goodness, it was finally over. The children were already saying that the man gave them the creeps. Finally, a guard shouted all clear, and they opened the massive city gates. The plan had worked. They were really leaving, putting Halland behind them. A moment later, Henrik skillfully reined in his horse. He went straight to the craftsman and told him their deal was complete. Seeing the man start to act shifty and hesitant, Henrik stared at him and asked what the problem was. Suddenly, the coachman yanked the reins, and the horses shot forward like an arrow. Inside the luxurious carriage, a sudden jolt threw everything into chaos. The heroine pulled her trembling children close to her and asked if they were all right. Eugenia had no idea what on earth was happening outside, with neither Henrik nor Elvery in sight. Could this be the doing of that treacherous coachman? The heroine knew she had to protect the children at all costs. She needed a quick way to escape, so Eugenia began desperately racking her brain for any possible solution. In that extremely perilous moment, Henrik and Elvery were chasing the carriage at breakneck speed. The black-haired man quickly drew a hidden pistol, his hand taking aim as he searched for a suitable target. His eyes widened when he saw the blonde girl risking her life. Utterly desperate, Eugenia had climbed out and was desperately clinging to the roof of the carriage. "Get back inside," Henrik roared, demanding that Eugenia climb back into the carriage at once. Just then, the treacherous coachman, seeing the girl risking her life hanging off the side of the carriage, whipped the horses to go faster, trying to stop the brave beauty from escaping. Henrik saw Eugenia barely holding on with one hand and shouted her name. Our heroine gathered her courage and, with her last ounce of strength, grabbed the smooth roof with her other hand. The black-haired man yelled that it was too dangerous and she needed to get back inside at once. He ordered Eugenia to get back inside the carriage and protect the young children. The heroine took a deep breath, but she listened to Henrik. The moment the blonde girl was back inside, the black-haired man had Elvery fall back a bit. Then, without hesitation, he took aim at a critical point and fired. With astonishing precision, the man hit the wooden wheel, punching a hole through it. It immediately split in two with a deafening crack and flew off. The carriage screeched to a halt, and Henrik immediately peered inside to make sure everyone was unharmed. The heroine forced a smile, saying she was fine, but asked him to get the frightened children out first. Henrik immediately ordered Elvery to carefully lead the frightened children out of the carriage. Then he offered his strong hand to Eugenia to help her out. "Stay with Elvery for a moment," the man requested. Once he was sure Eugenia was all right, Henrik went straight to the coachman to assess the situation. "Damn it," the black-haired man muttered. "The coachman's dead. They got him too. But how on earth did this information get out?" Suddenly, the heroine cried out Sally's name in concern. Henrik came over to see what was wrong, and Eugenia exclaimed that Sally had fainted. The heroine began to shake the girl, but to her horror, Sally started to weaken before her very eyes. They needed to do something immediately, or things would get very bad. Eugenia carefully handed the unconscious Sally to Mr. Elvery, pleading with him to look after the little one. The heroine frantically looked around, desperately searching for anything that could help them now. Her gaze suddenly fell on a familiar plant, its fruit a potential lifesaver. Eugenia hurried back to the little girl, leaned down gently, and whispered for her to open her mouth. Sally obediently did as she was told, and the heroine squeezed a few drops of the life-saving juice she had picked into her mouth. A completely dazed Joshua asked in confusion what on earth she had given his sister. The little one smiled and whispered that it was super tasty. Hiding his true feelings, Joshua clenched his small hands into fists. Then, holding back tears, he yelled in frustration that his sister was a complete idiot. The little guy just couldn't admit how scared he had been. Sally gently stroked her brother's cheek and said with a warm smile that everything was okay now. Henrik asked if Sally was all right, and Eugenia replied that the girl was likely just frightened, but she had eaten that special miracle fruit, so the fever should break soon. Nevertheless, the heroine said cautiously that she had better find some more of that healing fruit, just in case. Suddenly, Henrik strode towards her with a serious expression, saying he needed to talk to her now. "What on earth were you thinking, jumping from a moving carriage?" the man demanded irritably. Seriously, what could she say for herself after pulling a stunt like that? Eugenia explained that she couldn't let them get caught, so she had decided to jump over, subdue the coachman, and take the reins herself. But Henrik was still baffled, wondering how someone as delicate as her could think she could actually pull it off. The heroine took a small pouch of powder from her pocket, the same stuff she had used for self-defense before. But the black-haired man asked why she couldn't have just waited for him and whether she didn't trust him at all. Eugenia lowered her head and quietly replied that she had completed her main objective of getting them out of danger. They had escaped the duchy as planned, and she felt that he no longer needed her. Henrik came to the unpleasant conclusion that in her eyes, he was nothing but a scoundrel. Eugenia immediately blurted out that it wasn't like that at all. The man reminded her that according to their agreement, they were to leave Hallant together and head for the Ace Empire. Now his job was to get the lady safely back to the Empire. If he couldn't do that, she should at least trust herself. Eugenia immediately apologized profusely, saying she never meant to offend him. The heroine wasn't so sure. I mean, she was just a nobody, completely unimportant, because in this story, Eugenia was just a supporting character, not the protagonist. They could write her character out at any moment to make way for the hero. But when Eugenia, by a strange twist of fate, took Eileen's place, she faced a grim situation with potentially serious consequences for her. A desperate thought flashed through her mind. Perhaps she should make the ultimate sacrifice to protect Joshua and Sally. Deep down, the heroine seemed to think this was how things were meant to be. But suddenly, Henrik broke the silence, firmly telling Miss Eugenia that she was far more important than she thought. The hero insisted that sacrificing herself wasn't the only option. There were always other ways to handle things. The very fact that the young woman was now the guardian of two defenseless twins was a big deal in heroine itself. All this time, the heroine had been obsessed with how to change the future that was laid out for her. Interestingly, the most crucial character in how the story unfolds is actually Eugenia, not Aileen. So, if she was so important all along, what on earth had she been doing? The heroine gave a self-deprecating laugh, realizing her mistake, and with genuine regret called herself a complete idiot. Henrik replied calmly and understandingly that she just needed to realize that important truth for herself. The man suddenly asked the girl gently to give him her hand. It turned out the black-haired man had noticed her palms were scraped raw, so he carefully wrapped them for her with his handkerchief. Eugenia promised to wash and return the handkerchief, to which the man replied that she could do as she pleased with it. The heroine gave a bright, grateful smile and then walked over to the children. Her heart lightened. Joshua's whole face lit up the moment he was lifted onto the horse. It was clear the child loved it. Now, it was Eugenia's turn to mount the impressive steed, which looked like a mountain to her. She gave it a real try, using all her strength to climb onto the high saddle, but she couldn't manage it. So Henrik gallantly offered his help, which the young lady did not refuse. Before carefully placing his hands on her slender waist, the ever-gentlemanly man politely apologized. Then, with little effort, he easily and gracefully lifted the delicate blonde onto the back of the powerful steed. For that brief moment, their faces were too close, creating an awkward intimacy. The heroine, thinking improper thoughts, quickly shut her eyes in a fluster. Joshua looked at Eugenia curiously and asked in a suspicious tone what she was doing. The girl hastily exclaimed that she was just very tired, so they should get going as soon as possible. Joshua started to worry that Eugenia had a fever, but she told him she was perfectly fine. After traveling for quite a while longer, they stopped to camp under the stars and immediately build a fire. For the time being, they had to sleep in rather rough conditions, but no one complained. The heroine was truly glad she had packed her bags, as a sick child couldn't sleep on the bare ground. No, Henrik said he and Elvery would keep watch so the others could sleep. But the heroine doubted she'd be able to sleep outside, so she figured she might as well start preparing for the next day. She needed to give Sally another dose of medicine and, just in case, check on Joshua carefully. The young woman gently touched her brooch. The heroine didn't even realize when she had fallen fast asleep. Slowly opening her eyes, Eugenia vaguely became aware of someone nearby, softly singing a lullaby. But it wasn't the children, who were sleeping peacefully, so she must have been dreaming. In a half-asleep daze, the heroine sat up. Without looking away from his post, Henrik immediately asked if she was awake. The man hadn't slept yet. It turned out Elvery had gone to scout, so he needed to stay alert. Eugenia offered to take his place, but Henrik refused, certain he wouldn't be able to sleep anyway. The heroine asked in confusion if he had trouble sleeping. Henrik nodded, confirming her suspicion, and admitted the problem had been bothering him for a long time. But that didn't mean the man couldn't sleep at all, so she asked him to wait a moment. She carefully took a small jar of mint oil and a few dried mint leaves from her luggage. If brewed into a tea, it not only relieves fatigue, but also helps combat insomnia. Eugenia handed the hot, fragrant tea to the man and politely invited him to try it. Henrik took the drink gratefully, remarking that the refreshing mint flavor was quite nice. Observing him closely, the heroine noticed that the black-haired man also had a severe headache. She explained that lack of sleep often causes headaches and suggested applying some ointment to his temples and neck. The girl added that the miraculous ointment was easy to come by, so Henrik could keep it. The man decided to thank the blonde and, looking into her eyes, asked how much she wanted as payment for her help. Nothing, Eugenia replied gently. It's just a friendly gift for a companion in hardship. The heroine immediately grew flustered, remembering the difference in their status. She couldn't call them friends. Friendly? Henrik asked in surprise, with genuine interest and a hint of a smile. In that case, he would gladly accept the gift and promised Miss Eugenia he would make good use of it. A very cute and sincere smile appeared on the heroine's face. Illuminated by the campfire, she assured the man that her mint concoction would surely put him to sleep. Henrik wondered how a common maid could know so much. Had she dabbled in herbalism? In that case, Eugenia might as well open a pharmacy, he thought with a hint of sarcasm. The heroine explained that she had longed for the glamorous city life since she was a child. After her father passed away, She was left with no one and needed a job, so she came to the city. But she admitted she had never actually studied herbalism. Henrik asked in surprise, "So when did she become so skilled?" Eugenia simply said he was asking too many questions. The man smiled and replied, "Isn't it normal to chat in a situation like this?" The heroine agreed and, after a moment's thought, revealed that her late father had been a famous herbalist, but sadly, she had never really learned from him. Eugenia wasn't even allowed near the herbs. That was a strict rule from her father. Still, it wasn't a skill one could learn just by watching, so Henrik asked, a bit skeptically, when she had learned all this. Realizing she wasn't going to answer, the man gave a faint smile and said there was no point dwelling on it. Strangely enough, Eugenia herself didn't understand how she knew certain things about herbalism. No matter how hard she tried to recall the smallest details of her childhood, she couldn't remember a thing. Moreover, she had no memories before a certain age. She had heard a strange story from her father long ago. When she was only 5 years old, little Eugenia suddenly got lost in a dense, impenetrable forest. After 3 agonizing days, she was thankfully found in the highest, most inaccessible part of the forest. The little girl was completely safe thanks to the wild animals lying nearby who had kept her warm with their body heat. It was a wild experience, but Eugenia remembered nothing of it. And if you think about it, she had known the names of all the herbs ever since. The heroine flinched when the man called her name again, insistently and sharply. "What are you so lost in thought about?" Henrik asked. She replied that she was considering training to be a pharmacist. The man thought it was a good idea, since there were so many precious herbs in the vast empire. It sounded incredibly tempting, as she would be able to create many more types of medicine. And just like that, dawn broke and morning came. Most importantly, Sally's condition had much improved. The heroine also took some herbs to relieve her sore muscles. Henrik was also patiently teaching Joshua, who had shown a keen interest in horses and riding. At this rate, our heroes would soon find themselves in the majestic and prosperous Ace Empire. The atmosphere here was completely different from the duchy. Henrik said they were about to be inspected. The heroine was determined to do her best this time as well, but the black-haired man told her there was no need to be so tense now. As the guard let the heroes approach, Elvery told the lady not to be too nervous. The guard took the blonde's identification, gave a big, fake yawn, and also asked for her husband's. Without hesitation, Henrik presented his official documents with a flick of his wrist. Upon reading the man's name and title, the knights immediately began to apologize, saying it was an honor. The heroine was stunned by all this, and Henrik told her to hurry and go before things got any crazier. All the while, Eugenia remained completely confused, unable to find any logical explanation. Did they really get through that easily? Late that night, Joshua, like a little beast, flatly refused any help, saying he could get himself clean on his own. The heroine agreed while drying Sally's wet hair, when suddenly something caught her attention. At the very roots of the little one's soft hair, her natural color was starting to show. Eugenia wondered if she should dye it again, but she really didn't want to spend the rest of their money on more hair dye. She explained to the little girl that her natural hair color was growing out a bit. She would be free of Henrik soon, so she asked the child to endure it a little longer. After a large mug of refreshing ale, Elvery was genuinely thrilled to be back in his homeland and savor the taste of home. Henrik politely asked Miss Eugenia if she was enjoying it, and she replied that it was truly delicious. The heroine's attention was drawn to the man's hands. For some reason, he was wearing those fancy leather gloves again today, hiding something. Sally, sitting next to her, sighed heavily and said she was too full. It was so delicious, the little one felt she could happily eat like this all day. Since the children had eaten well, Henrik suggested they leave first, but Joshua immediately cut in to ask what he meant by that. The man calmly explained that this conversation was for adults only, but the child flatly refused to leave. The boy flinched when Eugenia called his name in a tone that was both sweet and suspicious. She tried to soothe the children, promising to explain later, and gently sent them away. Joshua didn't argue anymore, sighed, and told Sally to follow him and be good. The little one wished everyone a good night and sweet dreams with a bright smile. After the children left, Henrik suggested that Miss Eugenia could begin. They had all put in a great deal of effort, so the man felt it was time to part ways. Eugenia knew they would eventually separate, but she hadn't expected it to be today. For some reason, she was suddenly overcome by an indescribable, heavy sadness that gripped her heart. They had been through so much together, the girl added, and it was all thanks to the gentleman that they had made it this far. But Eugenia decided to ask an important question, whether her wanted notice was valid in the Empire. Henrik replied that the Empire doesn't receive the duchy's wanted lists, so she didn't have to worry. The black-haired man also wanted Eugenia to return her identification card, as they were skilled at identifying forgeries. While Henrik was whispering something to Elvry, the heroine reached into her inner pocket. Then, she handed over the document, and in return, the man placed a heavy pouch on the table. Inside was the promised payment, and the heroine was stunned by the enormous sum. A brilliant, sincere, and indescribably joyful smile immediately bloomed on her face, and she thanked the man. Elvry still had things to prepare, so he decided to leave first. Henrik took a pendant from his neck and handed it to the heroine. He had always worn the necklace under his clothes, so it was in perfect condition, and he had kept it very safe. Eugenia asked if he was leaving now, and he answered yes with some hesitation, as he still had things to do. The Empire was certainly safer than that treacherous duchy, but it never hurt to be careful. Henrik suggested she buy some high-quality things, but nothing too flashy that would attract attention. The heroine looked a bit lost and replied that she would definitely remember. Henrik unexpectedly made a gentlemanly offer to take a walk, and they went together towards a majestic tree. Eugenia was thrilled and even wondered how old the ancient plant was. This girl definitely knew about the gun, and that was classified information that Henrik had to report. He reminded Miss Eugenia that last time, she seemed to have said she knew something about guns. Henrik was very interested in an important question. Could the lady really use such a dangerous thing? The girl immediately cried out in dismay that it was absolutely impossible. She had never even seen a gun up close before. In the heroine's past life, if an ordinary person had a gun, the police would show up immediately. She didn't understand at all why Mr. Enrique was bringing this up. The man had intended to say he had some serious reservations about her, but he glanced at Eugenia, her hair fluttering in the sunset, and he just couldn't bring himself to say it. So he changed his mind and said he wanted to lend her a weapon for self-defense. The heroine smiled and told him not to bother, because she would never use it. Since she refused the gun, the man took out a black card and told her take it. Eugenia asked in confusion, wasn't that card a very precious memento? The man replied that she could return the card the next time they met, or in a year, whenever. Just then, the heroine decided to bury the card under the large tree. Henrik was completely confused, watching her strange actions, and asked what on earth she was doing. The blonde girl explained that its owner could use this small stone tower as a reliable signal. But Henrik said, doubtfully, that if someone kicked the little thing, the stone tower would immediately fall apart. But Eugenia smiled and said that the world wasn't full of bad people, and maybe no one would touch the stone tower. Enrique was stunned, gazing at the smiling heroine as she suddenly began to thank him for the time they had spent together. Eugenia held out her hand, adding that these sincere words came from the heart. The man hesitated for a moment, but still reached out and took her hand in his. He thanked the young girl, and in this beautiful and warm atmosphere, our heroes parted ways. Joshua asked Eugenia why she came back so late. The beauty apologized and gently told the child to go to sleep, not realizing he was bursting with curiosity. When Joshua found out Eugenia was entertaining a certain gentleman, he was completely stunned. He was upset because they hadn't even said goodbye to him. The heroine snapped back to her senses, immediately reached into her pocket, and remembered something important. Now she could return Joshua's pendant and brooch. Eugenia assured him that she had kept them very safe. When will you come? An echoing voice suddenly rang in Eugenia's mind. The heroine's wide eyes immediately showed pure, utter confusion. The young woman thought Joshua had said it, but the child immediately insisted he hadn't said anything just now. Then Eugenia thought Sally was talking to her, but the boy said he hadn't heard anything either. Joshua giggled and added sarcastically, this kind of thing happens to old people. Even though Eugenia was only 21, she was much older than Joshua, so in his eyes, she was practically an ancient relic. The heroine smiled sincerely, feeling warm inside, because she knew the child was finally letting his guard down around her. Eugenia settled the children for the night, thinking she should also get some sleep, as there was a mountain of things to do tomorrow, and she needed to rest early. But she just couldn't fall asleep. The heroine was troubled by a lingering question, and she was sure she had heard it. "When will you return?" The voice seemed to be the same one Eugenia had heard in her dream last time, but this time she knew she wasn't imagining it. Eugenia let out a big yawn, realizing it had been a long time since she had slept in a real bed. The long-missed feeling of softness quickly sent her into dreamland. The next day arrived, greeting our heroes with bright, new sunlight. Sally happily told Eugenia that she wanted to eat that strange thing on a stick called cotton candy. The heroine explained to the little one that she had to finish everything on her plate first. But the little one wanted to try other tasty treats too, so Eugenia suggested they share. Eugenia started to panic, as she didn't know where Shushu had run off to. The young woman turned her head and found the boy standing in front of the blacksmith shop again, staring at the shiny, forged swords. It was fine if he had a desire like Sally's, but Eugenia simply couldn't afford to buy him a sword right now. The young woman walked over to Joshua and gently suggested they leave, trying to hide her sudden sadness. And so, the heroes bought the herbs they needed and all the basic supplies. Then, they confidently walked towards the information bureau. As soon as she entered, Eugenia asked the friendly clerk if they had a map of the vast Asir Empire. The heroine explained to Joshua that they needed to find the way to the ducal territory. The clerk, smiling, immediately brought what Miss Eugenia had asked for. As soon as Eugenia and the children walked onto the brightly lit street, Sally spotted something very interesting. The little girl suddenly dashed off, saying she was going to take a look. Eugenia and Joshua simultaneously shouted for her to stop at once. The little one, startled by their sudden yelling, froze in place as if she had run into a brick wall. Then she covered her ears and yelled, asking why adults had to be so naggy. She genuinely felt that Eugenia and Joshua were acting exactly the same, and it annoyed her. The heroine smiled kindly and patiently explained to Sally that there would be trouble if she fell. The little one immediately threw herself into Eugenia's warm embrace. Before bed, the girl pointed out on the map the village where they would be staying for the night. Joshua was surprised to see how huge and vast the Duchy of Eurasia was on the map. The twins' great aunt was most likely in the imperial capital. Sally's eyes lit up, and she curiously raised her hand, interjecting that she had an urgent question. She asked in a small voice if they had to ride in the carriage again after what had happened. Riding in a carriage would be hard for Sally, but since we're not in the duchy anymore, the journey will be quick. After some thought, the blonde girl told the children they would be taking a high-speed train. To her delight, the children were thrilled. Eugenia was happy to see them smile, but once she delivered the twins, her mission would be over. The girl couldn't help but shiver at the depressing prospect. Once they separated, she would return to her old, lonely life. Although the heroine had longed for this in the past, she would become very, very lonely. But Eugenia decided not to think about that sad future, trying to shake off the gloomy thoughts and live in the present. She gently ruffled the twins' hair and told them it was time for bed. The train to the Duchy of Eurasia will depart in 15 minutes. All passengers please board. Two tall, imposing men were staring intently at the twins. The children, in turn, were frightened by the stranger's sudden and intense gaze. The train conductor noticed their fear and reassured Miss Eugenia not to worry too much, explaining that although the men looked serious, they were actually just here to escort you. The conductor politely led the passengers to a comfortable compartment and showed them to their seats. As the train slowly started to move, the children's faces lit up with pure excitement. This was a first for them. Eugenia was finally leaving this place. Once she was gone, she would no longer have any connection to Enrique. This sudden thought unexpectedly filled her heart with a strange sadness and longing. The The blonde girl slowly turned her gaze to the window, admiring the picturesque sunset sky. Only one question flashed through her mind. In a year, would she be able to see that man again? Soon, the train pulled into a bustling station in the Duchy of Eurasia. Perhaps because it was in the north, it was much colder here than little Joshua had imagined. The heroine suggested they prepare themselves thoroughly before heading to the Duke's magnificent mansion. She explained that they had an important meeting with a noble lady. To a weary Joshua, this sounded a bit suspicious, but he sighed and reluctantly agreed anyway. After settling into a cozy inn, the heroine opened her travel trunk, which surely contained her clothes. Eugenia felt a sudden pang in her heart, realizing she had completely forgotten to return the handkerchief Enrico had kindly lent her. What should I do, the girl thought. Once Eugenia returned that as well, there would be nothing left to remind her of that remarkable man. In any case, that was a year away, so she decided not to worry or grieve about it prematurely. Joshua, suddenly calling her name, gave the heroine a start. He called for Eugenia a few times, then asked what they should do now. But she immediately apologized, saying she would be right back. Little Sally ran up to the girl, looked into her eyes, and asked if she could go with her. But unfortunately, the heroine had to refuse the little one. However, Eugenia sweetly promised that they would definitely go for a walk together tomorrow or the day after. Joshua said he and Sally would wait for her, so she needed to come back soon. The boy also told the blonde girl to watch her step so she wouldn't fall or follow strangers who offer candy. Eugenia rushed out, and Sally anxiously asked her brother if their big sister would be back soon. Joshua reassured his sister, saying that it was none other than their Eugenia, and she always keeps her promises. Now, we need to talk about something very important. Sally cautiously approached her brother, who revealed his cunning and elaborate plan to her. Joshua sternly ordered his sister to keep this information a secret. A short while later, the door creaked open and Eugenia returned, startling the children. The girl happily rushed to the heroine, while Joshua suspiciously asked if something had happened. It was very suspicious, as Eugenia looked unusually happy and cheerful. The heroine took out a few small vials of liquid and offered to help the children restore their natural hair color. Now was the perfect time. Eugenia froze when Joshua and Sally's faces suddenly showed unconcealed, deep sadness. She asked what was wrong, but the children didn't answer, so Eugenia said she would go fetch some fresh, warm water. Sally and Joshua exchanged a silent, knowing glance. They were keeping a secret. Soon, the children's beautiful, natural blue hair was restored. Eugenia was genuinely happy that the dye had washed out of both children's hair, so she offered to dry Sally's hair first. Suddenly, the girl told the heroine that she didn't like that color at all, even if it was her natural hair color. When this color came back, Sally began in a frightened, trembling voice, looking at her hair. But Joshua suddenly cut her off angrily, telling his sister not to say such nonsense. Eugenia was stunned by the child's unusual behavior. A terrible and unsettling thought flashed through her mind. Had the children fought while she was out? This made her very upset. At the dinner table, Eugenia shared her thoughts, believing it would be difficult for them to get into Duke Horace's residence right away. So the girl began to tell the children what had happened during the short time she was away from the inn. Eugenia first went to a local merchant, hinting that the village seemed like a nice place to settle down. The man said that thanks to the Duke, they were able to live in peace. She replied that she wanted to meet him, but right now, even becoming a noble wouldn't grant an audience with such an important figure. Around the time his relatives were supposed to gather, Duke Horace's residence would completely stop receiving any visitors. The man blurted out that the Duke had even refused the emperor, but the merchant quickly shushed him. It was said that the Duke usually returned to his domain around this time of year. Now, she was wondering if she should go and see, but given the current situation, it wouldn't be easy, but one had to try, right? So Eugenia sent a letter to Lady Jacqueline Horace, saying she wished to return 2 long-lost flowers. The heroine came up with a plan. When the relatives arrived, the number of servants would increase, so she would look for a job as a maid there. The problem was the whole thing could take quite a long time. Because Eugenia might meet their great-aunt, Joshua asked her to bring something to prove their identity. But the heroine didn't think a simple brooch and pendant would really help them. I mean, it's not like it's a marchioness's heirloom, so the chances of those noble ladies recognizing it were slim. Just then, with a determined look on his face, Joshua decided to take a different, more extreme approach. The heroine jumped in fright when she saw the child pick up a pair of scissors and start cutting off locks of his own blue hair. Joshua hoped that when they met their great-aunt, Eugenia, could show her the hair. The girl anxiously asked the boy why he was doing that, and Joshua replied that his hair would grow back anyway. He had complete faith that Eugenia would be able to handle it. The heroine accepted what had happened, but made it clear to Joshua that he must never do that again. She firmly told the child that she would show the hair to the Duchess, no matter what. Eugenia looked at the neatly cut lock of hair and made a solemn promise. But soon after, to her dismay, the heroine discovered that the hiring was already over. They probably thought she was very unreliable since she had left her last job without a letter of recommendation. Eugenia didn't know how she was going to get in. It was said to be the hottest 2 weeks of the year, but you'd think it was freezing here. Even Sally was coughing. The heroine realized she needed to visit an herbalist shop soon to buy some anise and dried thyme. Why don't you buy it? Eugenia heard an indignant question suddenly cut through the noise. The merchant was very angry, questioning if the customer didn't trust an expert's word. The heroine was lost in thought, realizing she had seen that tall, cloaked man somewhere before. She couldn't have forgotten such a handsome man. The blonde man explained that the person who sent him on this errand had specifically requested the herb Maverick. The vendor loudly claimed that Maverick and Heckin had the same effect. How many times do I have to say it? The merchant snapped, his voice tight with anger. But despite this, the handsome man still looked skeptical. The vendor finally couldn't take it anymore. He lost his temper, threw the herbs on the ground, and told the blonde man to get lost, as he didn't want to deal with him anymore. The man immediately started to apologize, saying he hadn't meant to escalate things, but the vendor wouldn't budge. So, the handsome man glanced hesitantly at the herbs that had fallen in the dirt. The merchant was taken aback when the customer sheepishly said he would buy them. He started picking up the plants from the ground, muttering that the blonde man had finally made up his mind. The man was about to name a price, but the heroine interjected, coldly stopping the transaction. She prevented the handsome blonde man from making a rash purchase and stated bluntly that the plant was completely useless. The man was stunned by this sudden news. Eugenia deduced that since the boss had sent the handsome blonde man to buy Maverick, he probably had joint pain. Maverick, when dried, ground into a powder, and made into pills, is an old folk remedy for relieving arthritis pain. Heckin might look similar, but it's a completely different medicinal plant with entirely different properties. Moreover, if the boss had been taking Maverick for a while, Heckin would weaken its medicinal effects, and the situation would get worse. Hearing this, the vendor looked completely dumbfounded for a moment. But then he flew into a rage, asking if the girl was calling him a fraud, and said he'd been growing plants for 20 years. The heroine asked skeptically how, with so much experience, he could fail to distinguish between these herbs. She suggested going to the pharmacy at the end of the street to see if she was right. The vendor muttered a curse, calling it the worst luck, and blamed it all on his bad day. When the handsome blonde man told him to just turn himself in at the police station, he started packing up his things at lightning speed. But the fraud took to his heels, shouting, "Don't end up like me," as he disappeared into the crowd. After a while, the heroes finally got the Maverick, and the handsome blonde man thanked the lady, saying he definitely couldn't have done it without her. Eugenia told him that for future reference, he should always go directly to a hospital and then get a referral to a reliable pharmacy. The handsome blonde man was startled when the girl suddenly said she had to go. The handsome man asked if she happened to be from the duchy. The heroine, completely bewildered, asked how he could possibly know. It turned out her accent was a little different. An ordinary person might not notice, but he had caught that unique ducal lilt. If this guy was from the duchy, he might know that Eugenia was currently wanted. The handsome blonde man really wanted to thank the lady, so he asked for her name, but she said she hadn't done anything special. So she had to go. She didn't want to stay any longer. The man gently but firmly caught the ribbon on her dress, asking her to wait. The man insisted on repaying her, and eventually, Eugenia relented, telling him to let her go. The handsome blonde man immediately apologized for grabbing her without permission, saying he had acted improperly. She might think it was just a small favor, but she had really, truly helped him out a great deal. "Perhaps you don't believe me?" the man asked with a gentle, charming smile. The heroine answered with some hesitation, but the handsome man had already read everything from her expression. A complete stranger asking for her name, grabbing her, and talking about repayment would overwhelm anyone. The blonde man said he worked for the powerful ducal family of Eurasia. His position wasn't high, but he could prove his identity. Hearing him say this, the heroine froze on the spot. The man repeated that he wanted to repay her kindness, as it would save him from severe punishment from the family. It seemed this guy really didn't know that Eugenia was currently wanted. The heroine decided to seize the opportunity, explaining that she was having a hard time finding a job, so she asked if he could help inquire about any job openings in the Duke's illustrious family. The man grinned and promised to look into everything thoroughly for her. Eugenia was thrilled when she heard it would only take a few days. The blonde man suggested they meet here again at noon on that day. The heroine gave him a brilliant, sincere smile and thanked her new acquaintance. The blonde man froze, gazing at her radiant smile as if under a spell. And so, he finally worked up the courage to ask for her name again. The heroine said her name was Eugenia and told him to just call her that. No need for formalities. The blonde man said his name was Cheyenne, then bowed slightly and kissed the young woman's hand. He smiled, looking straight into her eyes, and said, "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Miss Eugenia." Reaching the great Asir Empire took much longer than Elvry had initially imagined. Still, after reporting to His Majesty, he could finally get some proper rest. Enrique was worried, wondering if Miss Eugenia had arrived safely. Elvire asked if the captain was even listening, and the black-haired man just said he was exhausted. They'd been working non-stop recently. Things were probably much better when they were with Miss Eugenia. The captain planned to have an audience with His Majesty right away, so he told Elvry to wait for him in the reception room. Henrik entered the throne room and bowed respectfully to the emperor. His Majesty praised the hero, admitting he had been on edge since he had returned later than expected. If Henrik had messed up, the emperor wouldn't have been able to face his father's wrath. The black-haired man sincerely apologized for causing him so much worry. Captain Shatton, the valiant Henrik, has returned after completing the arduous mission assigned by your Majesty. He is hidden in a safe place and secured it. However, the hero unfortunately failed to complete the additional task given to him by the Emperor. Despite Henrik's best efforts and a lengthy search, he was unable to find the late Duke's mysterious seal. The person who agreed to help them met a terrible fate, so the seal's location remains a mystery. But after investigating Halland, Henrik discovered that he doesn't seem to have found the seal either. The Emperor believes she was hidden in a place that would be very difficult for my men to find. His Majesty wanted to know if there was anything else of importance he needed to be aware of. Henrik remembered his conversation with Miss Eugenia about the gun, but decided to keep it to himself for now. Instead, he decided to bring up something else entirely. Henrik was finally ready to retire from service and leave his post at the court. He brought the matter up with the Emperor again, 3 years after his first failed attempt to resign. But the Emperor was unwilling to just let the #1 warrior of the Shatton elite unit leave. So His Majesty decided to grant the captain a leave of absence and suggested they revisit the matter after he had recovered. But that wasn't the answer Henrik was hoping for. The Emperor stood up, nodded firmly, and declared the matter settled. So Henrik said he would go, and His Majesty nodded, leaving the rest to the captain. The black-haired man felt it was best to postpone that important conversation for a while. The next time they met, Cheyenne brought the heroine good news. He could get her a job, but it wasn't a great one. The young lady would be stuck in the laundry room, washing dirty clothes all day. Nevertheless, Eugenia was happy with any job. She was just thrilled that Mr. Cheyenne had helped her. The blonde man said there was an opportunity for an interview right now, and they could go see the head maid immediately. The heroine finished the rest of her tea in one gulp, then placed the empty cup on the table, explaining with a laugh that this was her usual pace. Now, they could head to the Duke's residence without delay. The young girl didn't even see the man walking in front of her and accidentally bumped into him. Eugenia fell quickly, but Cheyenne caught her with astonishingly fast reflexes. She was stunned, her hands pressed against his rock-solid chest, and she quickly thanked him for saving her. Then she came to her senses and quickly pulled away, trying to hide her sudden fluster. Soon, our heroes arrived at the residence of Duke Horace. Eugenia had to nail this interview so the children could safely enter this place. Cheyenne explained that this was the servants' quarters, where all the staff and the chief steward lived. First, the blonde gentleman skillfully escorted her to the head maid's room, after which Sion politely knocked on the door and softly announced his name. While waiting for a response, the door slowly opened, and a look of utter surprise flashed across our heroine's face. For some reason, the head maid herself opened the door and, with a smile, said that she had been waiting for her. The heroine immediately introduced herself, and the head maid replied that her name was Leah. She suggested they go inside to talk and asked Mr. Sion to find the butler. To Eugenia, it sounded like a polite but firm dismissal. Sion fully understood the hint and, with a smile, wished the ladies a pleasant and productive chat. He then left promptly. The head maid, with a serious expression, asked Miss Eugenia to take a seat. She said that since the young lady had worked as a maid in a noble household, she should have a letter of recommendation. However, Eugenia said she couldn't get one. The situation was that she had to leave her previous job urgently, so she didn't have such a document. Just as the heroine thought, this was going to be tricky. A letter of recommendation was required to get a job in a noble household. The head maid decided to be frank with Miss Eugenia. We finished recruiting 2 months ago, so hiring Miss Eugenia now would seem like favoritism. But Mr. Sion did say many good things, making it difficult for me, Madame Leah, to refuse. But she doesn't even have a letter of recommendation, so it's a bit tricky no matter how you look at it. Eugenia perfectly understood what the head maid meant. She couldn't be officially hired. Suddenly, the head maid announced that it would be difficult to give her an official position. However, she decided to give Eugenia a temporary post until all the guests had left. For now, you will work as a laundry maid. It's hard work, but if you're willing, sign here. The heroine did as she was told and firmly promised to do her best. In that case, be at my office at 8 in the morning sharp, and don't be late. Eugenia bowed respectfully and repeatedly thanked her superior, asking for her guidance. The next morning, she tried to sneak out, but the children woke up anyway. They wanted to see her off, even though she told them to go back to sleep. Still, she couldn't help but feel happy about it. She started to kiss a sleepy-eyed Sally, but Joshua immediately shouted that he didn't want any kisses. She just patted the little tough guy on the head. The boy seriously told her to eat well, make friends at work, and respect her superiors. She was grateful that Joshua cared so much about her. She promised to do her best. Despite saying so, she was a nervous wreck inside. It was her first day of work, and she absolutely couldn't mess it up. She prayed for the courage to get through the day. The head maid clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. She introduced Miss Eugenia, saying she would be working with them starting today. The heroine smiled and promised to do her best, but she was met with a cold reception. They could at least respond, Eugenia thought. After the introduction, the head maid told everyone to get back to work. The heroine, looking lost, asked what she should do. A girl with red pigtails pushed a tub of laundry toward the blonde lady, telling her to find any empty spot to hang it up. But be careful not to damage anything. This costs more than a laundry maid's monthly wage. Eugenia reminded herself that she had to work hard for the children's sake. The maid started to gossip, saying the master would be back soon and they would finally get to see his handsome face. The master can't be that handsome, Eugenia thought to herself. But the heroine doubted he could be more handsome than Henrik. Eugenia decided not to dwell on it and got to work. Of course, the heroine hadn't expected the atmosphere here to be so bad. The maids must think she got the job through improper means, but Eugenia had somewhat anticipated this. The heroine pushed open the door and happily called out to the children that she was back. As she had expected, the food at the ducal household was indeed top-notch. Eugenia handed Joshua the bag of ingredients for making a welcome gift and suggested they try making it together. Now that we've added the Eugenia-style ingredients, we have to mix it well. Once the soft hand cream was ready, she poured it into a wooden box. After using this, let's see if they can still be cold to me, Eugenia said with a sly smile. Sally wondered why her big sister was suddenly laughing. The next day, the heroine cheerfully greeted everyone. She immediately started handing out the items, telling everyone to take one and apply it to their hands. Eugenia handed a bottle to the maid with the red pigtails, saying they could just try it, as if they were being tricked. The girl impatiently replied that she didn't need it, but applied it anyway. Suddenly, she felt her hands become miraculously moisturized. The maids immediately started asking Eugenia where she bought it, and the heroine proudly replied that she made it herself. The craft was simple, so the blonde lady didn't mind bringing more. The maids immediately warmed up and started telling the heroine their names, which made Eugenia very happy. Her charm was simply irresistible. A few days passed at the residence of the Duke of Ulysses. The heroine was hanging laundry, enjoying the fresh air. Just then, Mr. Sion appeared out of nowhere and asked if she had a moment. The heroine smiled and told him he didn't have to come by so often. A maid with red pigtails ran over and told Sion that they would take good care of Eugenia. The blonde gentleman thanked Jenny. She was surprised he knew her name and Sion said it was only natural since she was Miss Eugenia's friend. Jenny was thrilled, while the blonde gentleman remembered he had forgotten to give her something. He handed the heroine a small bag, telling her to share it with everyone. It was nothing for Sion, so he asked Miss Eugenia not to refuse. He said the Duke's relatives would be arriving soon, so everyone needed to gather at the entrance. As soon as Sion left, Jenny, with a sly smile, asked Eugenia what was going on between the two of them. The heroine brushed it off, but the maid continued, saying there had been a strange atmosphere between them since the first day. Eugenia immediately recalled touching the man's broad chest and then urged her friend to hurry. There was no time to think about young Master Sion now. She needed to see the high society lady as soon as possible. There had been no reply to Eugenia's letter, and it was difficult to enter the main building where the lady resided. The heroine began to worry that she would be driven away the moment she showed her face. Eugenia was startled when Jenny said the head butler was staring at her. For some reason, young Master Sion was standing next to him with a kind smile on his face. Seeing Miss Eugenia look his way, the blonde gentleman gave her a playful wink. The gesture was enough to make our heroine blush instantly. Now Jenny was even more convinced that something was going on between Eugenia and this handsome man. Suddenly, a maid standing next to Eugenia noticed that Amy seemed troubled and offered to get her some medicine. But the girl refused, telling her not to worry. She said she felt fine. The heroine recognized her. She was in charge of the noblewoman's clothes and bedding. Amy, almost inaudibly, asked herself what she should do. Eugenia decided to ask the girl if she was in some kind of trouble, but the black-haired girl suspiciously asked why she wanted to know. The heroine explained that her situation looked serious, so she thought she might be able to help. Amy hesitated, unsure if she should tell the truth. But Eugenia said to forget it if it wasn't that important. This prompted Amy to say that her parents had decided to visit. It turned out this maid had mixed up the dates, having her parents come today instead of tomorrow, but she hadn't finished her work. The heroine realized this was her chance and offered to cover Amy's shift so she could go home without worry. She explained that people should help each other in difficult times and that she couldn't keep her precious parents waiting. Amy immediately began to thank Eugenia and promised to repay her for sure. The heroine awkwardly suggested they hurry up to avoid being scolded by their superior, as the guests had already arrived. A noble family walked through the front door. The butler bowed to the guests and announced that His Grace the Duke was currently not in the capital, so he will be arriving soon. The nobleman said thoughtfully, adding that he should be focusing on raising an heir instead of enjoying himself in the capital. The butler replied that the master had already taken this into account, so the gentleman needn't worry. The man waved his hand and, with a smirk, said he had completely forgotten to greet the lady of the house. It seemed the master of this place wasn't on very close terms with his family. Madame Leah clapped her hands and announced that the rest could go back to work. The heroine said goodbye to Amy, telling her she could leave all the work to her. Eugenia entered the laundry room and got busy. She desperately wanted to finish her part as quickly as possible to carry out her plan. She was short on time and barely managed to finish everything. She had heard that the lady of the house changes into her nightgown around 9, which meant she had only one last item to fold. In fact, Eugenia was a nervous wreck and truly hoped this would work. The heroine pressed the snow-white handkerchief tightly to her chest, silently praying for Henrik to help her one more time. Then she hid the handkerchief inside a clean towel. The head maid would come later to take everything, but the plan was for the lady of the house to see it first. Eugenia hoped that Joshua's blue hair would leave a trace. The next day, the head maid sternly asked Amy what she had done. The girl looked clueless until Madame Leah asked if she was in charge of the lady's laundry. The head maid was furious because a servant had stuffed something strange into the lady's clothes. Amy, confused, began to explain that she hadn't done anything when Eugenia, who was passing by, confessed that she was the one who did it. Eugenia said she had accidentally left something of hers in the lady's clothes and now wanted to know if the lady had checked it. The heroine's plan had worked. The lady had indeed checked it and asked to see the person who did it. The head maid suspiciously asked Eugenia if it was really her, and the blonde lady confirmed it, apologizing to Madame Leah. The woman sharply told me to follow her and ask for the lady's forgiveness. I was finally going to meet the great lady in person. The head maid entered the greenhouse and reported to the lady that, per her strict orders, she had brought the laundry maid. So this was what the twins' great aunt looked like. The noblewoman looked me up and down, then dismissed the head maid. The head maid said she would be on standby if needed. I bowed and told her my name was Eugenia. The noblewoman took a sip of her tea and said I'd played a rather interesting trick with her clothes. I admitted that I had sought her out for a reason and had thus been so presumptuous. I begged her to hear me out, promising to accept my punishment afterward. As soon as the lady agreed, Eugenia's face lit up. This high society noblewoman was Jacqueline Hannah Horatia, known in social circles as the epitome of a perfect lady. In addition to that, she had long been the lord of the Duchy of Horatia. The heroine couldn't believe she was standing before such a figure, even though she was trembling. She had to do this. Eugenia mustered her courage and asked the lady if she had seen what she sent. Jacqueline Horatia had seen it all and explained that a long time ago, she too had the exact same hair color, which she hadn't seen in a very long time. Blue. It was the color of her paternal family. When the bloodlines mixed, it began to appear as an atavism. Only Jacqueline and her younger sister had that color. So, the noblewoman sternly demanded to know where the maid had gotten that hair. The heroine revealed that she had worked at the residence of the lady's late niece. There was silence in the air. Jacqueline Horatia froze when the maid told her the hair belonged to the children of her niece, Lady Keratin. She looked at the maid with a suspicious gaze. Eugenia explained that she had brought the lady's grandnephew and grandniece here. The young master and young lady were safe and sound, and the heroine could vouch for it. A look of astonishment flashed across Jacqueline Horatia's face. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The heroine softly added that she had brought the children from the Duchy of Harland and begged the lady to see them. Eugenia fully understood that as the adult responsible for the family, Jacqueline had to prioritize the family. But the children had not left home through normal channels, which meant there could be trouble in the future. The heroine began to fear that the lady might not take them in. Eugenia fell to her knees and began to plead with the noblewoman to help the young master and young lady. They turned to me, a common maid, and I embarked on this arduous journey without a word. The children said their great aunt would surely help them, so Eugenia desperately hopes that the lady will see them. For so long, Jacqueline had thought the children were gone. By the time she heard the news and learned of the situation, it was too late. Therefore, she agreed to at least see them. The noblewoman told Eugenia to bring the children here and allowed her to finally stand up straight. But the lady added that if this all turned out to be a hoax, she would never forgive Eugenia. Since it was our girl who left the blue hair, Lady Jacqueline guessed she was also the one who sent those letters. The noblewoman said she had ignored the letter because she thought it was some kind of cruel joke. If these children are truly alive, I shouldn't have ignored it. But we can't delay any longer. Lady Jacqueline told Eugenia to bring the children here tomorrow. Do it quietly. The heroine bowed and promised she would. With that, Lady Jacqueline told the girl she could leave. Eugenia smiled happily, and before leaving, she said she was very grateful for the lady's generosity. Late that night, the heroine finally finished the decorations. Actually, Eugenia had intended to buy new clothes for Joshua as he had asked, but she was so busy she completely forgot. However, the girl was glad to have at least finished the decorations and sincerely hoped Joshua and Sally would like them. I've been waiting for you. That voice spoke again, but this time Eugenia wasn't afraid, and she softly replied that she had been waiting for this moment too. Then, the heroine quietly peeked into the room. The children were already asleep. Eugenia felt a little sad that there were no photographs in this world. How she wished she could at least take a picture of the little ones. They were really going to be separated now, and the girl wouldn't even be able to see them sleeping anymore, which weighed heavily on Eugenia's heart. Before leaving, she wished the children sweet dreams. As soon as it was light and everyone was awake, the heroine set breakfast on the table. Noticing Sally's cheerful mood, the girl told the children she had something for them. Opening the small boxes, the children excitedly looked at the pendants the heroine had specially prepared for them. Eugenia suggested buying some nice clothes to go with the brooches. Joshua suspiciously asked what this was all about. The heroine replied, didn't he want to go for a walk together? The blonde lady suggested they hurry up and eat breakfast. That way they could set off. Come to think of it, it had been a long time since they had breakfast together. If Eugenia had known it would be like this, she would have eaten with them more often. Soon, our heroes arrived at the clothing store. Joshua looked suspiciously at the building and said he was going to bolt, making Eugenia worry that he didn't like it. Then, the young master got angry mystery, demanding to know what money Eugenia was using to bring them to such an expensive place. The heroine didn't want to resort to this, but she had no choice but to have Sally hold Joshua down. The little one grabbed her brother from one side, and Eugenia grabbed him from the other, and just like that, Joshua was excitingly arrested. The boy started to struggle, but they still pushed him into the high-end shop. Joshua didn't understand why they needed to get so dressed up, but Sally was very excited about getting a new dress. The heroine looked at the twins from all angles and happily declared that they looked like angels descended from heaven. Now, Eugenia agreed with the saying that children change from one day to the next. Joshua walked up to the heroine and insisted they leave at once because it was too expensive. But Eugenia refused, arguing that they needed to wear clothes befitting their status. The twins were stunned when the girl revealed they were going to meet their great aunt, which was why they had to be dressed presentably. The children immediately got excited, and Eugenia added that the meeting was tonight. Suddenly, she stood up and formally told the young master and young lady that they needed to be on their best behavior and greet her properly. Now, they should head to the Duchy of Heresia. Young Master Joshua and young Lady Sally did well, keeping up with Eugenia's pace, despite her being a bit eccentric. The next day, the heroine took the children of Marquis Keratin to see the lady. Joshua and Sally greeted Jacqueline Horatia according to etiquette and said they were very happy to meet her. But this wasn't their first meeting. The lady had seen the twins right after they were born. From their blue hair and golden eyes, Jacqueline was certain it was them and immediately gave them a big hug. The children started to cry as their great-aunt sadly said that they looked so much like her goddaughter. After having the children sit at the table, Jacqueline announced that they would stay in the mansion as her guests until her son returned. Eugenia also decided to stay, at least until the children were settled in from a move. The children might panic at such a huge life change, so she wanted to help them adapt as quickly as possible. Therefore, she asked the lady if she could continue working in the laundry. The lady agreed, though she was a bit surprised by Eugenia's choice. The next day, our girl knocked on the door of the young master and young lady. The twins were surprised that Eugenia was already off work, but she explained that she would be back after lunch. Our girl was taken aback when Sally suddenly said she wished she would treat them like before. Eugenia hadn't realized she was acting so distant, so she immediately apologized to the twins for her thoughtlessness. Little Sally immediately cheered up, while Joshua just calmly said that Eugenia didn't need to apologize. He simply told the heroine to hurry to work, and only then did she realize she was already late. She barely made it to work on time. First, she had to wash a large pile of black gloves, and she had no idea whose they were. Henrik immediately came to her mind, as he always wore them. Suddenly, a maid rushed in, saying the master was back, so everyone needed to assemble. She was about to go with the others, but then someone grabbed her arm. It was the Baron's son, who told Eugenia to wash this tablecloth as soon as possible and to keep it a secret. She could only obey, even though she really wanted to see what the Duke looked like. Just then, the front doors swung open, and the head of the family walked into the mansion. Henrik looked around and, with a feigned nonchalance, said it had been a while. The first thing the Duke did was go greet his dear mother, who had been waiting for his return and had missed him dearly. Sitting at the table, Lady Jacqueline told her son she had something to discuss with him. She explained that someone had recently arrived who had helped her goddaughter's children cross the border. Henrik suspiciously asked if they had confirmed the person's identity and if the children were truly related to Mia. Jacqueline nodded in confirmation, explaining that the children's hair color was identical to hers when she was young. The Duke flinched when his mother added that the maid who brought the children was very kind. He said he needed to meet this girl first. The Baron's son praised Eugenia for a job well done. As soon as he left, the head maid approached the heroine and told her to follow her. The maids guessed that Eugenia was about to be scolded again over the herbs, since she had left some on the lady's clean clothes last time. It turned out to be much worse. The big boss himself wanted to see our girl. Eugenia was completely bewildered. Did the head of the family really want to see her just because she hadn't greeted him with the other maids? Seeing the girl hesitate, the head maid urged Eugenia to hurry. Right at the door, she told the maid to go in, and our heroine was terrified at having to enter alone. Once inside, Eugenia squeezed her eyes shut and immediately began to apologize to the master, saying it was their first time meeting. But the master replied that they had already met and told Eugenia not to pretend she hadn't expected to see him here. But the heroine truly hadn't expected to see Henrik here. She immediately began to bow, apologizing to the master and saying she was truly happy to see him again. The two sat down at the table, and Henrik explained to Eugenia that he had called for her as soon as he saw his mother because he found out she had brought his niece and nephew. The heroine explained that she brought the twins because there was no one in the duchy to look after them. So, I have a request for you, sir. Eugenia wishes for you to let them stay here. In other words, the heroine wanted Henrik to become their guardian. Henrik stood up from the table and asked Miss Eugenia if she knew what a development assembly was. Seeing she didn't answer, the man explained that it was an event for the children of collateral branches of the family to showcase their skills. It was necessary for selecting the next heir to lead the Ulysses family. Oh, these two children that Miss Eugenia brought could potentially weaken Henrik's authority as the head of the family. In that case, what reason does Henrik have to take them in? The man explained that all the relatives had agreed to his method of selecting an heir through an ability test. So the question was, would they let these two children off the hook in this situation? Henrik was right, and the fact that this could be dangerous for Sally and Joshua began to worry the heroine. But she still firmly believed the master would not abandon them. Aren't those who oppose the family head's decisions the ones stirring up trouble in the Heresia ducal house? Henrik told Eugenia with a smirk that she was as sharp as ever. So he agreed that he would consider the matter of the children. Hearing this, the heroine's face lit up and she immediately began to thank him. Suddenly, Henrik told her to call him by his first name, just like before. The heroine agreed and was about to leave when she suddenly stopped to ask if Henrik had been sleeping well lately. He nodded, and Eugenia promised to make another batch of medicine for him. But she didn't want to cause unnecessary rumors, so she suggested sending the jar via Joshua. Henrik, however, had a better idea. She could just leave the medicine in the stables where his black horse resided. The heroine smiled, said she should be going, and added that she was truly happy to see him. Henrik smiled warmly and told Miss Eugenia that he was also happy to see her. As soon as the girl left, the butler, Cedric, knocked on the office door and reported to the master that he had brought the guest as instructed. A man walked in and told Henrik they had much to discuss. The heroine didn't know what to say to Joshua and Sally. She had to break the news that she was leaving. If she stayed at the ducal house, she might mess things up and the children could get hurt. Eugenia had promised to find them a better guardian than herself, so her business here was now finished. Walking into the room, the heroine noticed the children on the bed, completely absorbed in something. She went over to them and asked what they were busy with. The twins immediately shrieked in surprise, and Joshua unhappily demanded to know why Eugenia didn't knock. Sally immediately started explaining that they were practicing their writing, but Shushu didn't want to show his handwriting because it looked like worms. Hearing this, the heroine suggested the boy write her letters, which left him completely confused. Eugenia explained that they wouldn't be able to see each other every day soon. She revealed that she had met the Duke yesterday and that he turned out to be Henrik, the man who had traveled with them. Sally excitedly asked if he was the handsome man, while Joshua wondered if he was the one who was so good at writing. The female protagonist nodded and said sadly that since the twins could stay here now, it was time for her to start looking for a new job. After careful consideration, Eugenia thought that their contract was about to expire. Joshua shouted indignantly that they hadn't even found their footing in the duchy yet, and had Eugenia forgotten the agreement she made with him? She even accepted a ring for it. The agreement clearly stated that Eugenia had to bring them to Duke Horace's estate and arrange for them to meet their new guardian. Grandma said that things weren't settled yet, and Eugenia replied that everything would be decided once the development conference was over. That was the only reason Eugenia was still looking after them. The female protagonist hadn't expected the children to react this way, especially since the ring she got from the contract was fake. But there was no need to bring it up, so Eugenia decided to let it be. The children would understand in the future. Eugenia crouched down and said softly that was enough for today, and they would talk again tomorrow. Then she left the room. The female protagonist knew very well in her heart that with her status as a commoner, getting too close to the children would surely damage their reputation. Besides, she was currently a wanted criminal in the Duchy of Howland, and although it wasn't part of the Ise Empire, it would still cause a scandal. Earlier, Henrik had suggested that Eugenia become an apothecary. Opening an herb shop in the future wouldn't be a bad idea. The female protagonist made up her mind that the next time she talked to the children, she would be honest with them. Even though the twins were still young, they were good friends, and Eugenia believed they would understand that she had to leave. The Duke looked out the window again. He knew Eugenia worked in the laundry, but for some reason, he had never actually seen her. The head maid entered the study and asked him to sign a document. Henrik was surprised to hear that someone had decided to resign. At first, Mrs. Leah had given it to the mistress, but the mistress said that since it concerned the young lady who brought the heirs, it should be handled by the master of the house. The Duke stated coldly that he would handle it personally and asked everyone to leave the study at once and let him be alone. Henrik reread Eugenia's resignation letter, then clutched it tightly in his fist, not understanding whose decision this was for her to make. Eugenia could have simply requested a transfer to another position, but instead, she submitted her resignation. It wasn't really Henrik's business, but for some reason, he didn't want the blonde girl to leave the ducal estate. He decided to keep the resignation letter with him for now and set it aside. He would figure out later. He would not let Eugenia slip through his fingers. This time, the blonde young lady finally got her long-awaited day off. She decided to bring some mint leaves and snacks for the children. Suddenly, she spotted Mr. Cheyenne in a tree and anxiously called for him to come down. The man immediately jumped down and told her he had actually been looking for her. Cheyenne brought Eugenia's hair to his lips, smiling gently as he asked how she had been. The female protagonist thought to herself that a handsome face was too dangerous for her heart. She took a small step back and hurriedly said she was fine and that they hadn't seen each other in a while, probably because he was busy. Cheyenne replied that he wasn't that busy. It was just that his work required him to keep a low profile. Eugenia didn't believe him, guessing that the blonde man had messed something up at work and was now hiding from Cedric. Cheyenne asked where she was going, and Eugenia said she wanted to visit the market on her day off. Hearing this, the man asked if he could join her. The handsome blonde man swore nothing bad would happen, and besides, being with her was a good chance for him to hide. He didn't want to mess up like last time. Perhaps he could also learn more about herbs from Eugenia. The female protagonist didn't know he was still bothered by what happened back then, so she happily agreed to go with him and tell him about herbs. But first, they needed to change their clothes. Cheyenne thanked her excitedly and promised to study hard. And so, Eugenia and Mr. Cheyenne headed to the market, where she explained in detail about herbs and their different types. They picked out a bunch of snacks for the children, and finally, it was time to head home. Today was a lot of fun. Thanks to Miss Eugenia, Cheyenne had really learned a lot, and he was very happy about it. The man said he had to go because Cedric would be looking for him. The female protagonist waved and told the handsome blonde man to be careful. Cheyenne winked at her and asked when they could go on another date. Only then did she realize they were supposedly on a date today. But she quickly put it out of her mind, thinking Mr. Cheyenne was just a playful person. She went to deliver the oil to Henrik. Entering the stables, Eugenia began to look around for the black horse. She soon found the noble steed, which seemed to be watching her with interest. The female protagonist entered the stall, greeted the horse, and said with a smile that it looked just like its master. Mission complete. Eugenia had wanted to wait a month before giving him the oil, but alas, there was no time now. She had to leave. But suddenly, she bumped into someone's back. As she got to her feet, she let out a terrified scream. Eugenia stumbled backward, staring in horror at the cloaked stranger. For some reason, the cloak looked familiar. Suddenly, she remembered that Mr. Cheyenne had worn this before. Due to her own clumsiness, she tumbled head first into a haystack. The man helped her up, while Eugenia, indignant, couldn't understand why he was still hiding under that cloak. Henrik gently caressed her cheek and asked softly what she meant by that. The female protagonist froze, her eyes wide as she stared at the Duke, who was intently studying her face. Eugenia immediately bowed and began to apologize to Henrik, explaining that she was just startled and didn't recognize him. The man suddenly asked if that meant she would have reacted differently if she had known it was him. The female protagonist immediately nodded, exclaiming how she could possibly treat such a noble lord that way. Henrik started to say something, but waved it off, asking her not to do for others what she wouldn't do for him. Then he suddenly proposed they meet tomorrow at 11 o'clock at the cafe in the square. if she wasn't busy. The good news was that Eugenia would have an errand, but Henrik told her not to worry. He would assign it through Mrs. Leah, so she could use it as a perfect excuse to meet him. Since the Duke was already here, she asked him to take the bottles of healing oil she had brought. Henrik was a little surprised to see so many bottles. The blonde girl stammered that she didn't get to see him often, so she had to make a lot at once. His intense, heavy gaze made her blush. The man turned and bade her farewell until tomorrow. She agreed, watching him leave with a completely bewildered expression. She didn't sleep a wink that night. Eugenia racked her brain, wondering what Henrik wanted to talk about that he would specifically ask to meet her. Maybe she was in trouble, and her wanted status in the duchy had been exposed? Or was it about the children? As Eugenia approached the place, a waitress greeted her and asked if she was alone. The female protagonist answered flusteredly that her companion would be arriving shortly. She whipped around at the sound of Henrik's voice, saying there were two of them and requesting a quiet spot. The waitress nodded and told them to follow her. Eugenia barely recognized Henrik, as he didn't wear a suit in his daily life, but the outfit really suited him. Seeing the girl still standing there, the man turned and called for her to follow. He held out his hand, and the female protagonist immediately snapped back to reality. The two sat opposite each other, and the female protagonist learned that the reason for the meeting was her recently submitted resignation letter. The man took out the letter and handed it to Eugenia. The female protagonist was surprised to find the document crumpled, but Henrik never revealed why. Eugenia had written the letter because she intended to resign soon. Without a doubt, the Gerasimov estate was a wonderful place, but she had safely brought the two children here and now wanted to start a new life. Henrik couldn't believe that Miss Eugenia was going to leave the twins to find a new life. The female protagonist explained that she had never considered the children a burden. Since Henrik saw everything from an observer's perspective, he should have understood this perfectly, yet he said those words for reasons unknown. Suddenly, the man told Eugenia that she had turned his life upside down and was now claiming she was going to leave him. The female protagonist choked on what she heard and stared at the Duke in astonishment, speechless. She whispered that everyone was looking at them, so she asked Henrik to say right now that he had just misspoke. But unfortunately, the male lead was telling the truth. Eugenia had indeed completely upended his life. The ladies at the next table immediately began to whisper that the blonde girl was just toying with a good man's feelings. Eugenia jumped up and demanded to know why the Duke was doing this to her. But Henrik wanted to know why she wanted to leave, and why the Duchy of Horus couldn't be a part of her new life. The female protagonist explained that she didn't want to always be forced into a decision she would later regret. So Eugenia hoped the Duke would give her some time to think. Hearing this, Henrik apologized for not considering that. The female protagonist immediately replied that it was fine, and since the Duke was being so nice to her, she would accept his offer. So she thanked Henrik and promised to reconsider staying. Seeing the smile on Eugenia's face, the Duke was stunned for a few seconds. He said it was a good idea, then decided to ask something else. He wanted to know if Miss Eugenia was making this decision because of the children, and without waiting for an answer, said that it wouldn't solve anything. Henrik and his mother had agreed to offer her a position as their nanny, but that didn't mean she would be just an ordinary servant to the children. Eugenia would be with them and could take breaks whenever she wanted, so there would be no obstacles. It wasn't just the children who wanted this, but Henrik himself. The Duke smiled slyly, wondering if Eugenia knew that. The female protagonist's face immediately turned beet red, and she shyly promised to consider it and think it over carefully. Actually, Eugenia was surprised that Henrik had called her here for just this, as he was probably very busy. As soon as the man replied that wasn't the case, the female protagonist told him not to joke around, because his relatives wanted to see him every day. Henrik didn't deny it. They were willing to resort to extreme measures to get to him. So being with Miss Eugenia was a much better way to spend his time. The female protagonist awkwardly thanked him for saying so. The female protagonist handed a black card to the Duke, saying she was relieved to be borrowing it. Eugenia had no idea that thing wasn't just given to anyone. It belonged only to Chaitin, a shadow squad, directly under the ISA Emperor, and it came with special privileges. Even if the cardholder committed a crime while on a mission, they were untouchable. It allowed them to pass directly through checkpoints, without questioning. Henrik had lent her the card because he could track her location as soon as she used it. But now that Eugenia was here, it wasn't necessary. So he decided to ask how their stone tower was doing. The young woman answered briefly that it had become a memory. They had built the tower with stones and made a wish to meet. The wish came true, and now it could be savored as a memory. Henrik said it was a good memory. In fact, it wasn't as bad as he thought. The female protagonist had only intended to cover for Eileen, help the children, and then leave. But for some reason, everyone was suddenly clinging to her, even disregarding her background. However, Eugenia could understand the children. After all they had been through together, they wanted her to stay. To be honest, the female protagonist was even happy when the twins begged her not to leave. But why was the Duke so captivated? A wild thought flashed through her mind, but Eugenia immediately dismissed it, deciding not to jump to conclusions. First, the female protagonist decided to relax with a drink, so she ordered a beer as soon as she went inside. Because it was evening, it was packed with people. A maid from the Horace estate happily declared that she had put an absurd amount of salt in their food, which made her very happy. The young master was trying to curry favor because his family had fallen on hard times, and the girl was annoyed by his arrogant attitude. The female protagonist sat down nearby, so as not to miss any details. The maid was sure no one was paying attention to her, probably thinking she was just a child. The girl said this was more fun than she'd expected. Those two never left the guest rooms, so the maid had no idea where they came from. Hearing this, the female protagonist slammed her beer mug on the table, scaring the girls half to death, and then she calmly said that she had heard their entire conversation. Eugenia approached the maid and told her coldly that she had memorized her face and they would definitely meet again. Then she stormed out of the place, completely ignoring the maid's pleas for her to stop and explain. Hearing a knock on the door, Joshua told the person outside to come in. The twins were surprised to see Eugenia at the door, but the female protagonist just said she was curious how they were doing. She noticed the food on the children's table, but the twins said they weren't hungry at all. Selmia tried to say she didn't even feel like eating meat today, but the children's lies were too obvious to our girl. She suddenly rushed to the table where the food was. Just as she was about to taste the steak, Joshua yelled that she couldn't eat it, telling Eugenia to stop. She immediately made a face, unable to understand how they could serve this to children. Now she understood why they weren't eating. She forced a smile and asked if this happened often. The twins lowered their heads, and Joshua said awkwardly, "Yeah, of course," adding that the food must have been prepared wrong today. Eugenia was shocked by the child's reaction, as she realized something was very wrong. When everyone was asleep, she would go to the twins' room to make sure they were sleeping soundly. She never thought that after the contract ended, she would not only have to greet the children, but also personally take care of them. So there were rumors that the children were dependent on her, were there? Worried that she might somehow harm the twins. The female protagonist felt the best course of action was to stay calm and keep a low profile. Eugenia told the children that if the food tastes strange, as if the chef messed up, they should speak up. She was about to go to the kitchen, so she told the children not to worry and to wait a moment. Selmia interjected worriedly that she wasn't hungry at all and not to worry. Joshua, on the other hand, told Eugenia to stay out of it, saying they could handle it themselves. But Eugenia couldn't help but worry, because there was one important thing the twins didn't know yet. The female protagonist said excitedly that people have to eat to live. The twins probably didn't realize how important food was for growing children. So they had to eat a lot, because that was the only way they would grow up big and strong. So the children didn't have to worry about anything, just eat well and grow up big and strong. That was the most important thing. It was best to leave everything else to the adult, Eugenia, because she would do everything in her power to help. Joshua couldn't believe Eugenia would ask that. I mean, she was the only person they trusted. The children clung to her, crying that no matter how hard things got, she was the only one who hadn't abandoned them. The female protagonist thanked them for their trust and promised to be back soon. Eugenia couldn't understand how anyone could be so cruel to her precious children. But Eugenia needed to calm down. Her hands were tied, and she couldn't solve this problem alone. If Eugenia reported this, even a noble lady's patience had its limits. Perhaps all she could do was issue a warning, because the development conference was still ongoing, which meant there was only one way. Elvery peeked out from around the corner and suddenly spotted the female protagonist. He immediately greeted the girl happily, and Eugenia replied that it had been a while and that he seemed to have come at just the right time. The man asked confusedly what she was talking about. After the young lady explained what had just happened, a flicker of confusion crossed Elvery's face. He immediately asked Eugenia to wait a moment while he went to the office. At that very moment, a meeting was in progress inside. Elvery approached his lord and got his attention by apologizing for the interruption. He leaned in close to Henrik's ear and reported what Miss Eugenia had told him. The Duke suggested they take a break and reminded everyone that the guests from the Keratin family were staying in this house. It was no secret that they had recently gone through some very difficult times. Recently, as soon as the female protagonist was given permission to enter, Eugenia wheeled in a serving table and thanked them for their permission. The female protagonist introduced herself, saying she was a former maid of the Keratin household and had something to report. The attendees' faces showed confusion, as they knew the Keratin family had fallen. Everyone fell silent when the Duke sternly demanded quiet. Eugenia explained that she had checked the twins' food and found the steak to be impossibly salty and the potatoes undercooked. The Baron asked in confusion what this had to do with them. He began to scold the maid, saying she shouldn't be barging into an important meeting for such a trivial matter. Eugenia tried to explain calmly that the Keratin family was a respected marquis family in the Duchy of Hellant. The two children of this family had received an invitation from the noble Duchess Jacqueline Horatia to be guests of the ducal house. Everyone began to yawn. Clearly, the attendees were annoyed at having to sit here and listen to a common maid. Suddenly, Henrik interrupted Eugenia, announcing that as the head of the family, he was responsible for the honor of the Horus family. Everyone in the family needed to be aware of this. In any case, this was a matter we must deal with right now. The female protagonist presented the steak that was served to the young master and young lady. As soon as Henrik tasted it, he immediately declared the food utterly disgusting. As the head of the Horus family, he felt ashamed. The Duke decided that he, as the head of the family, would formally apologize to the children. Henrik immediately ordered the Baron to help Miss Eugenia find a responsible party as soon as possible. The head of the family decided to leave the matter in the hands of the victims. He suggested that Miss Eugenia tell the twins about this. The girl thanked the Lord for his help, and the man replied that it was nothing and she could go. A teacup shattered, and an enraged scream echoed through the room. How could they do this? Jacqueline Horatia couldn't believe it. They're not even 10 years old. The woman swore to the maid that she would not let this go, no matter what, and would make the culprit pay. Jacqueline slammed her palm on the table, demanding to know who dared to pull such a stunt. The lady made it clear that she would find everyone who was even remotely involved in this. The female protagonist quickly scanned the maids and immediately spotted the culprit. Now that Eugenia knew who was responsible, Jacqueline ordered her to follow the head of the family's instructions and identify the perpetrator. The maid grew nervous as the blonde woman approached. Cold sweat broke out on her face when Eugenia calmly said, "Oh, look who it is." The female protagonist told the maid to state her name and position. The maid replied in a trembling voice that her name was, and she was in charge of delivering meals from the main building and preparing the guest rooms. But where's the proof? She had only delivered the food to the young master and young lady's room. In that case, Eugenia could order the punishment of all the staff who witnessed this, namely those in charge of the guest rooms. If N was innocent, then one of her colleagues must be guilty, including the chef who prepared the food. The head chef immediately shouted that he did not play games with food. The ingredients were bought with the hard-earned taxes of the residents, and he cooked with the pride and honor of the Horus family. In that case, the culprit had also insulted his superior, the head chef. The maids immediately began to whisper, urging the guilty party to confess quickly, or they might all be implicated, and cursed inwardly. If she had known it would blow up like this, she wouldn't have listened to the Baron. She fell to her knees and began to beg for forgiveness. Eugenia asked her why she did it, and the maid replied that she just felt those children didn't belong here, that I've heard enough. Jacqueline Horatia roared. What gave a maid the audacity to worry about the children of distant relatives, and began to beg the mistress to spare her, but Jacqueline thought the girl should apologize to Joshua and Selmia, not to her. After that, it would be up to those children to decide her punishment, and then Jacqueline would also make a formal announcement. From now on, the maids in charge of the annex guest rooms would be working in the laundry. The girls were confused as to why they were also being punished, as laundry duty was the lowest of the low. Jacqueline ordered everyone to be quiet. The maids were supposed to be looking after the children, but they stood by and did nothing. Now, The mistress wanted to fire them all, but since it was a critical time, she decided to just reassign them. The problem was if the children wanted to fire these maids, there was nothing Jacqueline could do. The female protagonist's jaw dropped in surprise. Eugenia really liked the snack Selmia gave her. She asked Joshua if he wanted more tea, but the child refused. The female protagonist asked the twins what they wanted to do, and Joshua said they would go with their grandmother's decision. And as long as Eugenia was by their side, the children didn't need anything else, because now she was their exclusive servant. Selmia was thrilled that she could see her big sister more often now. The female protagonist smiled, realizing she should have done this sooner. That way, the children would have had decent food from the start. With the eyes of everyone in the ducal house on them, Eugenia's head was spinning, and she just wanted to get out of there. But now, she decided to stay and take care of them. Eugenia smiled and told the children she was very happy to be with them. She thoughtfully pushed another dish made by the chef towards the twins, and Joshua said, "Hey, cut out." The man heard the commotion coming from the mansion. The Baron guessed that those little rascals were up to something. This was the liveliest development conference ever. Henrik entered the room, saying he was clearly late. He had come to this conclusion judging by all the noise. The Baron and Baroness immediately jumped up and happily greeted the head of the family. Henrik sat down and suggested that today they talk about the children staying at the Horus estate instead of their own affairs. They had discussed the children's food a few days ago, and now Henrik needed to share something. The Duke was planning to recognize Joshua and Selmia from the Marquisate of Keratin as distant relatives. Henrik was serious about his decision. Everyone at the meeting immediately panicked, pleading with the head of the family to reconsider. But Henrik didn't understand why everyone was so against it. After all, it was a request from a noble lady. Still, they were against it, so the Duke bluntly asked them why they were being so particular. The Baron asked if, once they were recognized as relatives, they wouldn't be able to participate in the Development Council. Henrik knew very well that they would. To be honest, the Marquisate of Keratin was pretty much at a dead end now. So if Joshua and Selmia shone brightly at the Development Council, the other relatives would be unhappy because it would mean more competition. Moreover, the children were from Jacqueline's birthplace, so they would surely have the protection and support of a certain noble lady. The twins had lost their parents, so the Horus family, as their relatives, had to take them in. The nobleman asked the Duke to at least confirm that the Keratin children would not participate in the Development Council. I mean, they didn't even have the right to participate. The Baron added that those children don't have a single drop of the blood of their common ancestor, Duke Horus. Hearing this, Henrik's eyes widened. The Baron immediately realized he had misspoken and tried to explain. "That's not what I meant," Henrik said coldly. "Those twins are Jacqueline Horatia's blood relatives. She has dedicated many years to this family." Is the Baron now trying to question and deny this fact? The nobleman tried to explain that he didn't mean that at all, but Henrik replied curtly that he didn't want to hear any excuses, as he was well aware of how loyal the lady was to her family. But Baron Molen claimed that Joshua and Selmia were not blood relatives and had no inheritance rights in this family, even though Henrik had already pointed out their blood ties through his mother's side. The others just laughed nervously, saying that, of course, they all knew how protective the madam was of the family's lineage. Henrik was very disappointed to know that these family members would dare to slander her and question her rights. Baron Molen immediately began to backtrack, apologizing to His Grace the Duke for his slip of the tongue. The Duke told the nobleman to watch his damn mouth from now on and make sure such gossip didn't reach her ears. Furthermore, Henrik had summoned everyone here not to ask for their opinions, but to announce a decision he had already made, to recognize the Keratin family as a branch of the Horatia family. Henrik would not consider anyone's idle gossip. Of course, anyone who didn't like this decision was free to leave. The Baron cleared his throat and asked the head of the house if he could have a word. This head of the house was also from a collateral branch, but he still had the blood of our noble ancestors, which meant these children could become a problem. But Henrik didn't believe any of that and put a stop to it on the spot. The man headed for the exit, but a nobleman stopped him, asking him to hear him out. Henrik simply told the Baron coldly that he expected better from him at the next meeting. The Duke walked straight out without even letting the nobleman say a word. Then he started berating Baron Molen for what he had said, and the man retorted that he was the only one who dared to speak up. The Baroness interrupted the argument, saying that the most important thing now was the children. Since the head of the Horatia family had made a decision, the council members had to act. We still have a chance. We just need to nip it in the bud before it takes root. It must be stopped from developing. Late that night, Eugenia visited Jacqueline Horatia's room, bringing some herbs that were supposed to help her. The protagonist told the noble lady that she had been trained by a healer when she used to visit the village apothecary. The truth was, Eugenia had no idea that mugwort existed in this world, nor that it was called mood. Jacqueline thanked the maid profusely. She had been enduring unbearable pain, but now she felt much better. But the protagonist replied that the lady was flattering her too much, and that she was nothing compared to a doctor. It turned out that even the Horatia family's talented physician could do nothing, but Eugenia had managed to relieve the pain. The protagonist thanked her for her kind words with some fluster. After apologizing for her impoliteness, the head maid entered the room and announced that an urgent letter had arrived for the madam. Jacqueline Horatia immediately scanned the letter with a worried expression. "First, we must offer our condolences," the noble lady said softly. The protagonist noticed the madam becoming anxious and ventured to ask if something had happened. It turned out that the governess who had helped at the development conference last year and was planning to help again this year had withdrawn due to her husband's death. Speaking of which, Eugenia had heard that Joshua and Selmia were recognized as distant relatives, so they might be going as well. The protagonist asked the madam what exactly this development conference was for. Jacqueline Horatia explained that the development conference was something of a showcase and training ground where all the children from the collateral families gathered to receive the same top-tier education as the Horatia ducal family. They would be observed for a few years to see who had the potential to become the family's heir. And the governess, she was basically the person in charge of looking after the children in their entire lives. She educated them, helped sort things out when they got into trouble, and gave rewards and punishments as needed. Lady Helen had always done an excellent job as a governess, and now there was no one else who could take on the job. Eugenia told her not to worry, as the Horatia family would surely find a good replacement soon. The high society lady looked the maid over very carefully. If only her social status were a little higher, she would be perfect. The next day, our heroine was late to her mistresses and was dashing through the pouring rain. She hadn't even heard the bell. Jenny and Amy had both left, leaving her all alone. Suddenly, the young woman bumped into a figure in a cloak. Eugenia punched him in the face and screamed in terror, thinking she had really run into a ghost. But when he let out a pained groan, the protagonist realized it was a person, except he was holding a hammer, and if you looked closely, it was covered in, let's just say it wasn't chocolate sauce. Realizing this, Eugenia ran off like an arrow from a bow. The rain muffled the sounds, and she couldn't see the path very well. Perfect weather for getting things done. This was why she hadn't wanted to come today, but now she needed to get somewhere with people. This guy appeared out of nowhere and grabbed her arm. She violently wrenched her hand free and started screaming for help. She tripped on the stairs and fell. Before she passed out, she saw a worried-looking stranger reaching out to catch her. Surprisingly, although Eugenia had indeed taken a hard fall down the stairs, she didn't feel any pain. When she opened her eyes, she saw Mr. Cheyenne looking down at her with a worried face, asking if she was all right. She immediately thanked him for saving her, but he brushed it off, saying it was nothing. He was just scared to death when she suddenly punched him and screamed like she'd seen a ghost. His words made her cheeks burn. She couldn't understand why Mr. Cheyenne looked the way he did, why his clothes were all messed up. He explained that he had found a leak in the roof and came to help, but accidentally slipped and fell right into a berry bush. Then Cedric found him, so he had to run off to escape his nagging. Eugenia replied reproachfully that Cheyenne should have at least said something, but it turned out the man had a bad cold. He couldn't get used to the cold in the Horatio estate, and running around on errands wasn't helping. Eugenia sighed heavily and told him he needed to take better care of himself. The protagonist was about to leave, but suddenly felt a sharp pain in her ankle. Cheyenne immediately supported her, guessing it was a sprain, and asked her to sit down so he could take a look. He started to wipe the steps, but Eugenia said loudly that she'd be fine in a moment and there was no need to check. However, Mr. Cheyenne insisted on looking, as he wanted to see the condition of her leg injury. After examining it, he concluded that she had a slight muscle strain, so she should see a doctor. "What are you two doing?" a familiar voice called out. The protagonist immediately turned and looked up to see Henrik walking down the stairs with a serious expression. Mr. Cheyenne explained that Miss Eugenia had sprained her ankle and he was just checking the injury, while she said it didn't hurt anymore. The protagonist quickly jumped up and hopped around like a madwoman, trying to show them how energetic she was. But then another sharp pain shot through her, and she couldn't hide it. Henrik instinctively reached out to Eugenia, but froze when Cheyenne beat him to it, asking if she was okay. The blonde man took Miss Eugenia's hand and told her be careful, as her ankle was still injured. The Duke watched the whole time as the protagonist started smiling at the blonde man and thanking him for his concern. Eugenia was caught off guard when Henrik suddenly grabbed her hand, said he would call a doctor, and that she could take the day off. The protagonist couldn't understand what was going on with these two men at all. If anyone saw this, they would think she was so badly injured she'd need a week to recover. The girl raised her hands and shouted, "I'm fine. I can walk by myself, no problem." Suddenly, Eugenia became curious. What was the Duke doing here anyway? These stairs were for staff only. Henrik replied that he was looking for Cheyenne and told the blonde man to follow him. Before leaving, the man told her to be sure to get her ankle wrap. Then he gave her some delicious candy as an apology. The protagonist never expected Mr. Cheyenne to take her hand and kiss it, saying he hoped to see her again soon. She immediately blushed, unable to hide her fluster. Suddenly, Henrik's cold voice cut through the air, telling Cheyenne to come with him at once. The blonde man followed the Duke, giving Eugenia one last wave. The protagonist waved back, not understanding how Mr. Cheyenne dared to be so insolent to Henrik. The respected doctor of the Horatia family packed everything into his case and declared the treatment finished. He advised Miss Eugenia to avoid running or lifting heavy things for a few days so as not to worsen her condition. The protagonist never thought she would be treated by someone like him, and the scene was made even more awkward by Lady Jacqueline's presence in the room. The noble lady was glad there were no major health issues, as she had been truly frightened when she saw Eugenia limping. Eugenia noticed a large number of desserts in the room and thought the madam was entertaining guests, but that wasn't the case. Henrik had sent the refreshments after hearing that Eugenia had a doctor's visit today. The protagonist's first thought was that Henrik was only doing this because of the candies, but she then realized the Duke was just worried. The butler and head maid entered the room to inform the madam that a guest had arrived at the mansion. But Jacqueline reminded them that they didn't receive guests even in the worst weather, so she told them to escort the visitor back. Cedric explained that the guest had come with a letter of recommendation from Viscountess Helen and had decided to come as a governess. Perhaps because she couldn't attend the development conference, the noble lady had decided to send someone in her place, that we first need to verify the authenticity of Lady Helen's recommendation. So Jacqueline allowed the guest to enter. With that, our girl got up to leave, promising to return tomorrow for the poultice. Moreover, Eugenia had also brought a cane in advance. But the noble lady didn't want to take it, feeling it made her look too weak. But our girl insisted, and eventually, she convinced Lady Jacqueline, who asked Eugenia to watch by her side to make sure she didn't lose her balance. Our girl smiled brightly and told the noble lady she could count on her. She asked the madam to speak up if she felt any discomfort, and then the two women set off to greet the visitor. Jacqueline thought the journey to the Horatia estate must have been difficult, but the woman's voice assured her the trip was smooth. The visitor asked the noble lady to take the letter, saying it was a bit damp but still legible. Suddenly, our protagonist realized where she had heard that voice from, but the hood made it impossible to see the person's face. As if reading her mind, the visitor immediately apologized to the noble lady Jacqueline Horatia for not removing her hood. The protagonist's eyes widened in shock. Surprise also showed on the visitor's face. Standing before her was none other than Aileen Blair, the very same person who was supposed to have saved the children from a mansion at the cost of her own life. The girl immediately recognized Eugenia and asked in surprise how she got here. Suddenly, Aileen lunged at our protagonist. She gripped Eugenia's hand so tightly that our heroine cried out in pain and begged the teacher to let go. Henrik roughly pulled Eileen's hand away and snapped at the newcomer, asking if she couldn't see she was hurting Eugenia. There was a commotion downstairs, so the Duke came down to see what was happening. Jacqueline explained the situation. Lady Helen couldn't come, so she sent someone with a letter of recommendation in her place. Aileen immediately interjected that she was from the poor baronial family of Blair, which was why she had to work as a governess. It turned out she and Miss Eugenia already knew each other. The protagonist explained that Aileen had been a governess for Joshua and Selmia at the Marquis of Keratin's estate for a while. Aileen confirmed that the late Marchioness of Keratin, may she rest in peace, had given her the opportunity to live with those lovely little angels. Then she started apologizing to Eugenia, saying she was just very surprised to see her here so suddenly. She asked the girl hopefully if Selmia and Joshua were here too. Her eyes grew as wide as saucers when the protagonist said she had brought them. Aileen fell to her knees, thanking Eugenia frantically, because not seeing her children, she had thought something terrible had happened to them. She wasn't in town at the time, and when she heard about the situation with the Keratin family, her heart nearly stopped when she couldn't find the twins. It was a miracle that they had arrived here, safe and sound. To this, Henrik replied that it wasn't a miracle, but Miss Eugenia's doing. The Duke was curious how she had crossed the border, and Aileen explained that she did it with the help of a family. She worked as a caregiver for a while, and that family helped her. Henrik was clearly unconvinced, but Lady Jacqueline told her son to drop it. That's enough small talk. The noble lady told Cedric and Leah to take the teacher to a room to rest. Aileen thanked the madam for her hospitality. Jacqueline turned to Eugenia and told her she could go as well. The protagonist nodded, still in a bit of a daze, not expecting to run into the noble Aileen in a place like this. It felt very strange, and Eugenia didn't know how to react. Jacqueline told her son that she felt old, her joints were getting worse, and even the doctors were helpless. Henrik suggested sending for a top doctor from the capital, but she refused. She had been feeling much better since Eugenia appeared, as the girl was sharp and knew her stuff. Moreover, the maid was a cool beauty, extremely intelligent and quick-witted. Jacqueline was even considering having Eugenia stay on to take Miss Leah's place. The noble lady had heard that the girl had shown up at the family gathering and accused them of treating the twins like trash. This showed her true mettle, making her an excellent candidate for head housekeeper. Although Eugenia was busy taking care of Joshua and Selmia for now, the twins wouldn't be children forever. They would grow up and have to leave home to spread their wings and see the world. The woman gently stroked her son's hand, just as her eldest son, Henrik, had become independent at such a young age. The man looked away, saying nothing. In any case, Lady Jacqueline said, since Eugenia was a foreigner, it would be difficult for her to settle down and live here. It would be nice if she could meet someone special among her colleagues. The woman started to suggest candidates, but Henrik cut her off, asking what she had called him here for in the first place. Lady Jacqueline came to her senses and explained that she wanted to talk about the young Baroness Aileen Blair. She was considering hiring her as the governess for this development group and wanted to hear her son's opinion. Henrik knew full well that based on her past actions, he couldn't object to hiring her, so he told his mother to decide for herself. Lady Jacqueline smiled and thanked her son, glad that he wasn't causing her any trouble. As Eugenia expected, Aileen was hired as the governess. In the novel, this girl was good with children, so there was no need to worry. The protagonist brought the teacher to young Master Joshua and young Miss Selmia's room. Aileen excitedly asked if she could open the door, and the protagonist said, of course, go ahead. The girl immediately pushed the door open, calling out for Joshua and Selmia. Joshua immediately snapped irritably. Who's so rude? Aileen covered her mouth with her hand, unable to hold back her tears. She rushed over and hugged the children tightly, saying, I'm so happy you're really alive. The twins winced in pain and begged the teacher to let go, saying her hug was suffocating them. Seeing the twins were in pain, the protagonist immediately rushed over, but suddenly Aileen roughly shoved Eugenia aside with her elbow. The protagonist immediately fell to the floor with a hard thud, wincing from the pain in her leg. Seeing this, the twins started to cry, but Aileen just held the children tighter. A crazed smile appeared on Aileen's lips. She was now with the children she had raised. The woman looked at the children tenderly, confessing that she had missed them terribly during this time. Selmia broke free from her embrace and threw herself into the protagonist's arms. Aileen couldn't believe what she was hearing when the maid Eugenia began to comfort the young miss in a trembling voice. The heroine asked Sally if she really didn't remember her. Joshua, completely shocked, grabbed Miss Aileen's hand and asked how she got here. The heroine explained that she had rushed to the Marquis of Carrington's mansion as soon as she heard the news, but couldn't find the twins. She felt sick to her stomach. Aileen was terrified, thinking she had been too late. So that was it. Eugenia had been wondering why the person who had risked her life to care for the children hadn't come looking for them. The protagonist soothed Selmia and suggested they go to the teacher, who was clearly happy to see her. The girl obeyed, and Aileen immediately apologized to the young miss if she had scared her. Eugenia was glad that Aileen had calmed down. But what was with that fiery gaze? No matter how much she missed the children, it didn't warrant being so oblivious to her surroundings. The protagonist began to wonder if Aileen had always been like this. 3 days later, in the grand hall of the Horatio estate, Henrik greeted everyone and announced that he would introduce the teachers. First was Kushino Phenom, who announced he would be teaching the history of the Aise Empire. This year, a lady named Liana Bashful would be in charge of social dance and public speaking. And finally, Aileen Blair, who said she would teach etiquette and basically oversee everything in their lives. Seeing Joshua and Selmia's happy faces, Eugenia knew they were very excited about this. The heroine was happy to see the children so thrilled, but she wondered if the children from minor families would look down on them. Henrik announced that classes would officially begin tomorrow. As with every year, the children would spend 5 weeks learning different subjects, and at the end of each week, everyone would have to present their strengths. Now, the noble Lady Jacqueline could offer the children some words of encouragement. She told them that everything they learned here would be a valuable asset, so they needed to give it their all. The madam promised that they would be well taken care of during the development assembly. Aileen smiled smugly, telling her to trust them. Class should be over by now, so our protagonist needed to hurry and deliver these snacks to the children. Just as Eugenia was thinking that Selmia could finally feast on her favorite sweets, someone placed a hand on her shoulder. It was the teacher, Aileen. The girl was smiling like a madwoman, and our protagonist couldn't figure out why she found it so creepy. Just like that, Aileen suddenly asked if these were the snacks for the young master and miss, and Eugenia nodded. Hearing this, the teacher told Eugenia that she worked really hard. The girl asked if her work was busy, and our protagonist replied that it was what she had to do. Aileen pointed out that it was lunchtime, yet Eugenia couldn't even have a proper meal and was just running around delivering snacks. So the teacher asked her to let her take the snacks to the children. She promised to take care of Joshua and Selmia's snacks and thanked Eugenia one last time for bringing them. But the protagonist stopped the cart and told the teacher it wasn't necessary. This was food for the elites, so she couldn't slack off on delivering it or at least saying hello. If Eugenia really wanted to go, Aileen wasn't going to stop her. She knocked on the door and called out to the children, saying she had brought them snacks. The twins happily opened the door and immediately asked the teacher if Eugenia was with her. Upon seeing the protagonist, they ran straight to her, completely ignoring Aileen. She reminded them that she was there too, saying she felt a little left out and wanted to have some tea and a chat with them. Joshua agreed and told Eugenia to get everything ready. After pouring the fragrant tea, the protagonist asked the children if they were enjoying the classes. The young master immediately said, of course, but Selmia said, maybe not that interesting. You know, it was all stuff she already knew. Aileen immediately reprimanded Selmia, telling her to sit up straight and that you must never forget your manners. Eugenia told the young miss that she had gone to the market yesterday, which was packed with all sorts of delicious treats. So she thought of Selmia and bought a whole bunch for her. The little one reached for the candy, ready to dig in, but the teacher, Aileen, quickly grabbed her hand. She explained to the young miss that she couldn't eat those. Selmia tried to argue, but Aileen told her to just listen. Then she sternly lectured Miss Eugenia, telling her not to bring that kind of thing again because it was bad for Selmia's health. Aileen knew Eugenia was the children's personal maid, but she didn't expect her to be so short-sighted. I understand your concern, the protagonist said calmly. She was just as worried about the young miss and master as teacher Aileen was, as she had been looking after them for a long time. Aileen let out a small laugh and told her to leave all those worries to her from now on. The twins sensed a strange atmosphere from the teacher's behavior. Aileen immediately smiled and told the children not to worry about what Eugenia said, because she had also taken care of them for a long time, so now the twins could only trust her. The protagonist suddenly realized, did Aileen see her as a rival? Unexpectedly, the girl came up to her, placed her hands on her shoulders, and asked if she had finished all her work in the room. She advised Eugenia not to push herself too hard. All right, the maid's work is done. She can get lost. And with that, Miss Aileen just kicked the protagonist out. Elvery returned from the funeral soon after, and His Grace the Duke told him to return to his post. The assistant agreed, but then he was very confused and asked what Mr. Cheyenne was doing there. The blond man's lips curved into a smile as he said he was just bored to tears. There was nothing to do, and the moment he stepped outside, the Duke was on his tail looking for him. But Elvery pointed out that His Grace the Duke hadn't even glanced toward the north window lately. He had been observing closely lately, and the assistant understood completely, because Mr. Cheyenne had a face that could launch 1,000 ships. Henrik told him to stop talking about that, and asked about the results of the task he had assigned his assistant. Elvery said he had checked the dam on his way back, and the water level was at its peak. Hearing this, Henrik ordered him to reinforce it as soon as possible. Cheyenne looked bewildered, wondering how it could rain with such a clear sky, completely unaware that the weather in the north was unpredictable. Henrik knew very well that he needed to pay special attention to that matter this year. The twins excitedly told their big sister that the candies were super delicious, and Eugenia told them to eat slowly and not to gobble them down. Selmia confessed with a huge smile that she would be happy if the girl came to see her every day. Joshua told his sister to keep her voice down, just in case, because teacher Eileen couldn't hear this. The protagonist told the children to eat calmly, even though after that day, Eileen wouldn't even let her near the twins. Fortunately, she was out of town today, so Eugenia managed to see the children, but they couldn't keep meeting like this. Joshua decided to voice his concerns about teacher Eileen, who had been acting really strange lately. I mean, she just left so suddenly, and although she asked how they were doing, she didn't say much about herself. Eugenia listened carefully and told him to be careful. If something major had happened, teacher Eileen might just be trying to forget about it. Besides, if she found out they were meeting in secret, Eugenia might never be able to see the twins again. They might even throw her in prison for disobeying orders. Eugenia grabbed Joshua's leg and begged him never to forget her, to which the boy said, "Who do you take me for?" A smile immediately bloomed on the protagonist's face. If even the children had noticed, then there was definitely something wrong with Eileen. Eugenia decided to keep a close eye on her until she figured out what Eileen was up to. Later, when the heroine heard the question about who she was seeing, she was completely taken aback. She couldn't understand at all why Mrs. Jacqueline Garcia would ask such a thing. The noble lady lamented that Eugenia must be very lonely, not knowing many people in the empire. Just as Mrs. Jacqueline proposed setting Eugenia up with someone, Henrik jumped up as if he'd been shot. The room fell deathly silent, and both women stared at him in surprise. The Duke mumbled an apology, saying he had forgotten something very urgent. The heroine was stunned when Henrik asked her to go with him. A confused Mrs. Jacqueline asked her son what business he had with Eugenia, to which he only replied that he had a headache. The tea Eugenia had brewed earlier was actually quite effective, so the Duke intended to return to his study for some more. Following behind him, the heroine timidly asked if his headache was very severe. The man said that things had been a bit difficult lately, and he wanted to take a walk before heading back. The heroine suggested the garden, as a walk could help with insomnia, and then she could brew some more tea. Suddenly, the man stopped in his tracks. He then turned to Eugenia and asked if she would like to take a walk with him. Seeing the young girl's confusion, the Duke held out his hand to her and asked if she was sure she didn't want to go. Eugenia immediately blushed at the unexpected offer, but she took his hand nonetheless, and our protagonists walked toward the garden together. Henrik asked if she had encountered any problems here, and Eugenia replied that everything had its own good points. There was only one thing she needed to get used to, but the heroine was confident she would adapt, and eventually she would have more free time. Eugenia took a few steps forward and added that by then she could look around, and then she would realize that, in the end, she was all alone. To be honest, Eugenia was already feeling that way. Joshua and Selma had become busy, and it was now difficult for her to see them. Suddenly, the girl realized she had said too much. She immediately felt awkward and blurted out that she was just rambling to Mr. Henrik. The heroine took a step back, explaining that she was not usually like this. Eugenia didn't see the step behind her and immediately fell backward with a cry of surprise. But Henrik caught her at once, pulling her close, and for a moment their faces were very near. The man said irritably that she was quite a handful. The heroine flusteredly thanked him for catching her. The young girl looked away, saying that Henrik was always helping her. Eugenia looked back at the man, who was staring at her in surprise. He couldn't say a word, and his hand slowly loosened from her waist. When Henrik started rubbing his nose, the heroine was taken aback and immediately asked anxiously if he was all right. She had no idea what Henrik was thinking at that moment, and he, looking at Eugenia's beautiful face, realized that from now on, things would become very difficult for him. Baron Milan's son asked the other children if that nobody from a fallen family didn't annoy them. My dad is always scolding me, asking why I can't stand out. The boy suggested teaching the twins a lesson, convinced that the others wanted to as well. But the children thought it wasn't a good idea, because not long ago someone had tampered with their food, and both the Duke and the old madam had stood up for them. Baron Milan's son shouted. What else could they do? Because he was sick of seeing them. A girl froze, her hand still reaching for the doorknob, when the young master yelled that it was all that servant's fault. Eugenia, if she hadn't snitched to the Duke, things would have been different. Eileen overheard all of this, and a plan immediately formed in the heroine's, Eileen's, mind. If it succeeded, she could easily get rid of this burden. Meanwhile, Eugenia was ecstatic because last night had been so wonderful. She couldn't believe she had been in Henrik's arms, and that he smelled so good. Whatever that scent was, the heroine couldn't just go looking for it, even though she really wanted to. Eugenia was surprised when the young miss and young master suddenly appeared beside her. Joshua irritably asked what she was giggling about, and the heroine replied that it was nothing. Suddenly, Selma excitedly announced that teacher Eileen was organizing a class picnic for tomorrow, and the maids had to go along too. The heroine promised to be ready and asked the twins if there was anything else important. Joshua explained with his head down that the teacher had told them to bring something belonging to their parents, but he and Selma had nothing but those gems. That was why the twins were so afraid of losing them during the picnic. Eugenia was stunned. Eileen knew full well why Joshua and Selma were here, so how could she suggest they bring their parents' belongings? The girl clutched her apron tightly and told them not to worry. She had made the jewels into brooches so the children could pin them to their clothes and not lose them. Joshua shyly agreed that she was right. The heroine smiled and told the twins not to be too nervous and to have fun. The children promised, and Eugenia immediately perked up, asking what dishes she should make. But the next day, all of the heroine's enthusiasm had vanished. Ginny asked why they were made to bring the children over, only to now have to wait for them to return. They were on the distant opposite shore, which made the heroine worry if everything would be all right. But Eileen cared a lot about Joshua and Selma, so nothing bad should happen. If something went wrong, the heroine decided she would take a small boat over to check. Ginny promised to cover for her friend if she suddenly wanted to take the boat, but Eugenia refused. The sky, which had been clear just a moment ago, suddenly began to rain, so Ginny and the other maids ran back to the mansion to get umbrellas. Seeing the butler helping the children onto the boat, it was clear they were preparing to return. But suddenly something caught the heroine's eye. Eileen was holding down a struggling Joshua, and the scene raised many questions for Eugenia. The young master kept complaining, but the teacher still managed to get him on the boat. After the children returned to the other side, the heroine praised the twins. She wondered if the children had fun at the picnic. The heroine stiffened when Joshua called her name in a tearful whisper. She immediately sheltered the children with her umbrella, crouching down to ask worriedly if something was wrong. The boy cried that they had lost the brooches. The teacher said they had to show them to each other or their parents, so they had to take them off, but they think they lost them. Then the other children started making fun of Joshua for crying over such a small thing. Baron Milan's son sneered that those jewels were sparkling in the grass recently, and he thought it was just trash. However, if Joshua agreed to kneel, young Master Ranville might reveal where they were. Joshua grabbed the kid's collar, shouting that they were his parents' mementos. The heroine immediately pulled the young master away, explaining that it was wrong to do that, but the boy was still struggling. Just then, Eileen appeared, indignantly asking what Joshua and Ranville were fighting about. She ordered them to stop fighting at once and go home, as it was starting to rain. Joshua tried to explain that the brooches were on the other side of the river, but the teacher coldly told him to obey her orders. Suddenly, Eugenia stood in front of the boy and confronted the teacher, asking if she shouldn't have been more careful, since she was the one who decided on such a lesson. Eileen scoffed, asking if the maid was trying to interfere with her teaching methods. But the heroine explained that the brooches Joshua and Selma brought were the only mementos left by their late parents. Teacher Eileen was well aware of this. But the woman replied that she was just doing her duty as a teacher, so don't say her decision was wrong. So Eugenia should go and get them, as that was her job as a maid. But the heroine was already planning to do just that. Selma wiped away her tears and said the brooches were probably still at the picnic spot. The heroine promised she would definitely find the jewels. She would be back in a flash. Meanwhile, in Duke Henrik's office, the man agreed with his assistant's suggestion that something like this could not happen again before things got worse. We need to nip this in the bud. At that moment, Henrik had no idea what consequences his decision would bring. The heroine was completely submerged in water, and she couldn't swim at all, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, Eugenia heard a voice telling her to hold on a little longer. The glowing butterflies said they had found someone to save her, so Eugenia just needed to hold on with the last of her strength. The girl grabbed onto a piece of wreckage. She could finally breathe properly again. She thought she was going to die for a moment there. Luckily, the brooches were fine. It would have been real trouble if they got wet. It's better to pin it to my clothes. I can't risk losing it. Eugenia squeezed her eyes shut and began to pray that she would be all right and reach the shore safely. Just then, Henrik appeared, frantically shouting Eugenia's name, his heart about to leap out of his chest. The heroine was stunned to see the Duke. Henrik ordered them to send out a lifeboat at once, but Jenny said the boats were all gone. In that case, everyone should get ready. The man immediately yelled for Eugenia to be careful, as a huge wave was coming toward her. The wave crashed over her, pulling her under and making it impossible to breathe. Eugenia slowly opened her eyes when she felt a touch on her cheek. Henrik had jumped into the water right after her. Then, his lips pressed against hers, giving her precious air. After they both made it to shore, she began to cough frantically, trying to get all the water out of her lungs. Eugenia's eyelids began to feel heavy, but she knew she couldn't fall asleep or Henrik would be terrified. The man took her in his arms, saying they would go to a nearby cabin, as it was impossible to cross the river now. Fortunately, it was regularly maintained, so there was food and supplies. It should be fine to wait until the weather clears. But Eugenia still looked to be in bad shape. Henrik felt he needed to add more firewood. Suddenly, a glowing butterfly appeared before him. After looking at it for a moment, the nobleman realized he had seen this light on the shore a little while ago. This was definitely not just a hallucination. That was for sure. Nor was it a firefly, as one might think. So what on earth was it? Suddenly, a glowing butterfly landed on the young woman's forehead. And just like that, the heroine's entire body began to emit a strong, bright blue light. Henrik had no idea what had just happened. He was completely at a loss, trying to figure out what on earth was going on. The man gently touched the heroine's hand, deciding that none of it mattered. The most important thing now is that you wake up, okay? The Duke said, kissing Eugenia's hand. The heroine slowly opened her eyes when she heard an unfamiliar voice call her name. A fairy was sitting in front of her, and Eugenia began to think she was dreaming. Eugenia was stunned when she saw her own childhood body. Meanwhile, the fairy flew in front of the little girl and declared that a girl so young should not be going to the afterlife yet. The glowing butterflies exclaimed that she couldn't be saved, that the man had not kept his promise back then. The fairy was well aware of this, but without that stone, they couldn't travel to the new world. The queen decided to trust a human one last time. Only one soul can enter a body. The heroine watched, as if hypnotized, as a small wisp of cloud floated out of her mouth. The small cloud babbled in panic, but the queen immediately calmed it, saying that it was rare for souls to cross worlds. The fairy offered the soul a deal. If it could bring her the wishing stone and the shape-shifting stone, she would give it another chance at life. The cloud of mist nodded firmly, agreeing to the terms. But not yet, as Eugenia's soul was too young for such a thing. The queen decided to turn her soul into a seed to help it grow. She would only leave the important memories, and Eugenia would forget all the pain she had experienced. In return, one day, the girl would grow up, open her eyes, and keep her promise. The stone would guide her back, and finally, the queen would grant our girl a blessing, so she could hear what every blade of grass was saying. Eugenia froze the moment the fairy looked directly at her. Suddenly, the queen leaned in close and told her this would be a great help later on. The girl could not be defeated by anything now. It was time to open her eyes. The queen called out the name Harry, and a bright blue light enveloped the heroine, pulling her back to reality. Eugenia slowly opened her eyes. She immediately felt someone holding her hand, and, realizing it was Lord Henrik, the girl sat up with a start. The man felt a wave of relief that Eugenia was awake. The girl immediately started looking for the brooches, but the Duke told her to calm down, saying he had temporarily removed them while taking care of her. He immediately returned the jewelry, the very thing Eugenia had risked her life for. The heroine realized she hadn't thought about this recently, as things had happened that weren't in the original story. But the fact that she knew about herbs and could hear strange voices must be related to the fairies. But where was she supposed to find that stone? They said they would only leave Eugenia with the memories she needed. Suddenly, Henrik touched the girl's forehead. He asked with great concern how she was feeling and felt that her fever had broken. Being so close to him flustered her, and she blurted out that it was a bit cold. Henrik handed her a wooden cup and told her to drink some warm water. Eugenia asked when the rain would stop, and he said it didn't look like it would stop anytime soon. She was sad that Joshua and Selma were so worried about her. So was I, Henrik said, his tone a bit sharp. He explained that he had been worried too, so he didn't understand why she was always so reckless. Realizing her blunder, she immediately began to thank him for saving her. Then she added that she always tried to be careful. She explained that whenever it concerned the children, her body just moved on its own and she couldn't control it. It felt like a young person's love. Henrik was well aware that those two children were very important to her. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and told her not to forget that she was also the most important person to someone else. Eugenia promised, and this time he chose to believe her. She eagerly reminded the Duke that she had never lied to him, which was true. It pained her that she always told him everything, yet knew so little about him. He said his story wasn't that interesting, so she asked him to at least tell her something about his childhood. Henrik finally agreed, saying it would be the first and last time he would tell her his somewhat dark story. The Duke began his story, saying he had no mother. The previous Duke and Duchess had been childless for a long time, and since they were the only remaining members of the family, they needed a way to secure an heir. And Henrik was just lucky. They found him because a plague was rampant and orphans were everywhere. Thanks to the Duke and Duchess, the child no longer had to starve. He no longer had to worry about his daily survival. That was why Henrik decided to become the best son he could possibly be. That way, he would be worthy of these good people who had adopted and cared for him. The little one lived like this for several years, until his mother finally gave birth to the son she had always wanted, a boy named Jade. As terrible as it sounds, when his younger brother was born, Henrik began to wonder if he could still stay here. These thoughts prompted him to become a military officer. His parents both objected, saying he was just the younger brother, but Henrik ended up joining the military academy anyway. As he was the best knight in the Ace Empire, they sent him to Chateau. It was tough, but the man didn't regret it. He finally felt like he had found his place. The heroine guessed the gloves were because he had been injured during training. Deciding to take a chance, Eugenia asked if she could see. The man said they looked terrible. The heroine carefully removed the gloves and saw that Henrik's hands were covered in scars. No matter how good the Duke and Duchess were, things like social status still existed. Henrik had always been desperately trying hard all by himself. Now that Miss Eugenia had seen them, that's enough seeing. But the heroine held his hand tighter, telling him not to hide them. These scars were proof of Henrik's hard life, something to be proud of, not to hide. The male lead looked completely bewildered when she said they were beautiful. Yeah, Henrik said, lacing his fingers with Eugenia's. Then he gently kissed her hand, his eyes never leaving the heroine, and added, "If you say so, then it must be true." A look of shock immediately flashed across Eugenia's face. Seeing the heroine's reaction, the man asked, "Can I hold your hand?" Eugenia shyly said, "That's not it," and a happy smile immediately bloomed on Henrik's face. Then he told the heroine, "If you'll let me, I will definitely find a way to be with you, so please trust me." Eugenia was surprised that Henrik was envisioning a future with her. To hide her embarrassment, she assured him, "I'm very good at waiting, so you just need to hurry up and finish your story." The man nodded and explained that he had been working at Chateau ever since, until the day he received the news. It was raining that day, just like today. After hearing the terrible news, Henrik managed to get home quickly. He walked into the room and saw his mother, dressed in mourning, standing there staring at a snow-white towel. Hearing footsteps, she turned her head, and Henrik saw the despair in her eyes. Elvire explained to Henrik that his father and Jade had fallen into the river. Ever since young Master Jade got the pony he loved to ride, he had gone out with his father as soon as the rain stopped. But the heavy rain had washed out the ground, and his grace immediately jumped in to save him. But in the end, they both drowned. When Mrs. Jacqueline saw Henrik at the door, she froze. Then she rushed at him, screaming frantically, asking why he did it, why he had given that pony to her precious boy. If it weren't for him, her son Jade would still be alive. Henrik stopped mid-sentence, a voice screaming in his head that it was all his fault, that Jade and the master were dead. Seeing his expression, Eugenia asked worriedly, "Hey, are you okay?" "Don't continue if it's too hard," she said. "You don't have to say it." But he insisted he was fine, though she could see he was about to break down. She immediately hugged him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have pushed you like that." "Don't force yourself," she told him. Henrik gently pushed her away and said softly, "I should have given Jade a different gift." If he had lost Eugenia too, if he had been a second later, Henrik wouldn't have been able to live. The heroine gently took his hand. "It's not your fault, Henrik." He gave his brother a pony, opening the floodgates of disaster. But you can't predict how life will turn out. It's always full of variables. And the Duke did save her. The heroine knelt before him, insisting it was all thanks to him. To put Lord Henrik's mind at ease, the young woman promised to be extra careful from now on. Despite this, the Duke reminded Eugenia that she was always so reckless. When the heroine huffed that she was serious now, a faint smile crossed Henrik's lips. The two made a pinky promise, and she repeatedly assured him she was serious this time. After they had both crossed the river safely, the Duke apologized for worrying everyone. He ordered Cedric to take care of the mess and to keep a close watch on the river area until further notice. Then Henrik told Eugenia to go back and rest, as she hadn't recovered yet. She did as she was told. Jenny immediately rushed to the girl's side, asking how she was and saying that the young master and young miss were in the mansion now. Eugenia asked how they were, and the maid said they had cried so much they were exhausted. Henrik called for Cedric and Elvire and put them in charge of moving Eugenia to the main mansion. A fever like that wouldn't get better on its own, so the family doctor needed to be called. And there was something Elvire needed to investigate. Someone had deliberately made a hole in the ferry Eugenia was on. When Henrik had checked it a few days ago, there was nothing of the sort. When the Duke jumped into the water, he had managed to spot the hole in the bottom of the overturned boat. Elvire wasn't surprised at all that his grace hadn't forgotten such a thing, even at such a critical moment. The Duke asked his assistant to find evidence at all costs. A little later, the heroine began to seriously doubt whether she should be using such a luxurious room. She was told it was the room Henrik had arranged for her, but it was too extravagant for a mere maid. The family doctor prescribed some fever medicine for Eugenia, and since there were no other injuries, as soon as he left, the young woman realized she was dead tired. But first, she had to return the brooches, as the twins must be worried sick. Just then, she heard small footsteps approaching the room. Joshua and Selma immediately burst in, both anxiously asking Eugenia if she was okay and how she was feeling. The children immediately rushed to hug her, and the heroine, somewhat flustered, assured them she was fine and they didn't need to worry. Joshua immediately started saying it was all his fault, that none of this would have happened if it weren't for those damn gems. Eugenia knelt to comfort the children, saying it wasn't Joshua's fault, so there was no need to cry. Eugenia took out the brooches, which she had managed to bring back safe and sound. The twins froze the moment they touched the heroine's hands. Joshua flew into a rage, asking Eugenia why she was acting so out of line. Had she forgotten to take her medicine or what? They were both very worked up over the heroine's decision, and she felt the need to change the subject quickly. Seeing a book by Selma's feet, Eugenia asked the twins if they wanted her to read to them. But the little one said firmly that she had brought the book to read to Eugenia tonight, because the girl always read them bedtime stories. This time, Selma decided she would be the one to read, so that Eugenia could rest. The little one patted the pillow beside her, eagerly telling the girl to hurry up and lie down. The heroine broke into a wide smile, thinking how adorable Selma was. Once everyone was settled, the young miss opened the book. Now, she could begin reading the story about the fairies. A long, long time ago, in the depths of the darkest forest, lived a fairy queen. She played with the bears, the rabbits, the grass, and the butterflies. One day, a lost traveler stumbled in and begged her to grant his wish and help him find his way home. The man missed his family very much and wouldn't stop crying. But the queen could not leave the forest, so she decided to lend him some jewels. Use one turquoise to wish to leave the forest, and the other will become your legs to help you escape. But you must bring them back later, no exceptions. The traveler was overjoyed and immediately thanked the fairy queen. With the fairy queen's help, he left the forest and was reunited with his family. The story ended, and Selma closed the book. The heroine asked in confusion if the story really ended just like that, because it didn't say whether the traveler returned the jewels. Joshua thought about it and felt the book had no other ending, but Selma was sure the stones were returned. Eugenia understood completely. This was definitely the same story the fairy queen had told her when she was unconscious. Moreover, the pattern on that turquoise made her feel as if she had seen it somewhere before. Joshua just shrugged, saying it was just a fairy tale for little kids. Eugenia laughed and said he was still a child, but he insisted he had grown up long ago. As the young master handed Selmia a piece of candy, Eugenia's gaze fell upon the brooch. Come to think of it, that brooch was also made of turquoise. Could the traveler from the fairy tale be one of Marquis Carrington's ancestors? Moreover, she only started hearing the voice after touching those gems. Perhaps if she touched him one more time, the truth would be revealed. But just then, a man suddenly walked in, asking if Joshua and Selma were there. The moment teacher Eileen saw the twins she had been looking for all this time, her face lit up with a smile. I noticed that the little one immediately hugged me tighter upon seeing the teacher. I grew tense and asked Eileen what she was doing here, while she pretended to have just noticed me. She asked how I was feeling. Eileen had heard the maid was back, but she was swamped with work and only just managed to come over. Expressionless, I asked with a hint of suspicion if the teacher was truly worried about me. Eileen took a step closer, patted Selmia, and said with a smile that I had done a very good job. I immediately told the twins that I needed to talk to their teacher about something and asked them to step out for a moment. I assured them that everything was fine and it wouldn't take long. The twins jumped off the bed, and the teacher told her cute little darlings to wait for her for a bit. But Joshua dodged Eileen's hand and urged Selmia to hurry. As soon as the children left the room, the teacher smiled and said how cute they were. Since Eugenia was up and about and the children were safe, Eileen prepared to leave as well. But the blonde told her to wait, yet the teacher clearly had no intention of doing so. So our heroine had no choice but to grab her arm. She told Eileen they needed to talk. The teacher shook off our heroine's hand and agreed that there was indeed something to discuss. Then she pointed at Eugenia and said that the girl was just jealous of her close relationship with the children. A common maid might not understand, but Eileen insisted that she stop trying to curry favor with her children. Since Eugenia was a maid, she should be as quiet as a mouse, just like all the other servants. The heroine could bear it no longer and slapped Eileen across the face. The teacher stared at her in shock, asking in disbelief how a maid could dare to hit her. Eugenia didn't deny it, certain that Eileen had pretended not to notice Ranville throwing away the brooch. The teacher immediately slapped her back, shouting, "What on earth are you spouting nonsense about?" The heroine grabbed her hand, declaring that it was Eileen who was jealous of her relationship with the twins, not the other way around. She deliberately took the children away and intentionally didn't look for the brooch, so that when Eugenia went to find it, she would be swept away by the current. Since the maid had made such a bold accusation, Eileen demanded proof. The moment Eugenia said she had evidence, the teacher told her not to lie, claiming she had already covered all her tracks. Realizing what she had said, she immediately covered her mouth with her hands. The heroine took a step closer and asked if Eileen knew what she had seen on that ferry. The teacher took a step back, asking in confusion what the girl was talking about. Just as Eugenia revealed that she had seen a valuable item there, an item the teacher had lost, she suddenly grabbed the vase. Eileen immediately brandished the vase, demanding the maid answer her now or shut up forever. The heroine squeezed her eyes shut and began to shield herself with her hands. But the blow never landed, because Henrik suddenly appeared and grabbed the teacher's arm, sternly asking what she was doing. The woman yelled that she didn't start it, that Eugenia had hit her first, and she was just trying to teach her the lesson she deserved. Henrik's jaw tightened as he questioned what right Eileen Blair had to punish anyone. Hearing the Duke's icy voice, the the teacher froze. If I were Henrik, I would be more careful and not show all my cards so rashly. Eileen didn't understand what the Duke was saying, but he snatched the vase from her hand, saying she would understand soon enough. The teacher froze instantly when Henrik said there was a hole in the fairy for some reason, and that it was no accident. If they found out who did it, as Eileen had suggested, the Duke had to make sure they paid the price. The vase slipped from Henrik's hand and shattered. The heroine would never have thought that Eileen would try to smash a vase on her. She was very lucky that Henrik had stopped the teacher, otherwise the consequences would have been dire. Eugenia assured the Duke she was fine, that the teacher hadn't even laid a finger on her. She choked up when Henrik told her that it was a good slap. The man promised he would handle the aftermath, so Eugenia could take action when necessary, but not when it was completely unnecessary. The heroine gave a small smile, then remembered the hole in the boat the Duke had mentioned earlier. The man nodded, explaining that he had seen axe marks on the bottom of the boat, which meant it was deliberate sabotage. Eugenia wondered why the boat had broken into pieces, and if Eileen was really responsible. The Fairy Queen's request was important, but they had to deal with this more pressing matter first. The heroine requested that the guards in the area be relaxed tonight, as she had set a trap. The culprit would soon reveal their true colors. Late at night, the girl opened the door and found the guards gone. Eileen thought her luck had turned, little knowing that the girl had seen something that made her completely certain she wanted to get rid of her. I have to find it quickly. I'm finished if it's exposed. The teacher rummaged through the nightstand, wondering where it was, where Eugenia had hidden it. Looking for something? A voice cut through the room, making Eileen freeze on the spot. She turned around and saw Eugenia, the Duke, the butler, and that creepy maid. A small laugh escaped the governess's lips. Glancing at the flower in the heroine's hand, Eileen said she didn't know what the girl was talking about. The heroine told her to stop pretending that no one else had a flower like that. Eileen knew this maid had it in for her, but Eugenia had really gone too far this time. Now, she was just trying to harass her for no reason, but flowers like that were everywhere. But the heroine explained that orange flowers don't grow anywhere in the Durasan territory. They are native to a port city in the southern duchy of Howland, which is why nobles use them for marriage proposals. Of everyone in the mansion, only Eileen's tutor had been to that city. So basically, the girl had received a marriage proposal. Eileen told her to shut up, but Eugenia kept pressing, telling the teacher to stop beating around the bush. The dark-haired woman's voice was hoarse from screaming as she demanded how a common maid dared to touch something like that. Henrik stepped forward, shielding Eugenia with his arm. The teacher blurted out that it was that man who had given her the flower. The weather was clear at the time, but the wind was howling, so Eileen asked Count Landry to hurry inside. But she noticed the man begin to hesitate. The Count took the girl's hand, saying Eileen was the only one who truly cared for him. He kissed her hand and asked if she had considered his proposal to become a real family. But Eileen reminded him that she was just a common caregiver, and that his late wife was probably still on his mind. The man only said that those left behind feel nothing but heart-wrenching loneliness. So Count Landry wanted to escape that loneliness as soon as possible. He handed the flower to Eileen and asked if she could do him this favor. And what do you know, the young woman accepted his proposal, agreeing to become his lovely wife. Hearing this, a smile touched the man's lips beneath his eye patch. Snapping out of her memory, Eileen screamed in hysterics that the man had said he loved her. Count Landry had asked her to start a family, only to abandon her because she couldn't bear children. The young woman couldn't even figure out why she couldn't have children. The heroine didn't know him, so Henrik explained that he was once the commander of the Order of Knights. He was close with the ministers, so he wasn't the type to let just anyone cross the border. After Eileen Blair was fired from the house of Marquis Carrington, she found a job at Count Landry's estate. He had been giving Eileen contraceptives because he already had a growing heir and didn't want another child. Henrik felt sorry for what the heroine had gone through, but that didn't mean Joshua and Selma could become her children. Eileen screamed madly that she had raised and taught those children, and what right did a maid have to take her place? She swore she would never give up the twins. Suddenly, Selma ran into the room, screaming like a banshee for the teacher to shut up because she was her mother Mia's daughter. The girl clung to the heroine, saying tearfully that her family was Keratin. Joshua walked into the room, backing up Selmia's words. They had trusted and listened to the teacher, but they never thought of letting her replace their mother. Elvry apologized to his master and explained that the young master and young lady had insisted on coming themselves. Eileen couldn't believe what she was hearing. Duke Henrik snapped his fingers, informing Eileen Blair that he would not listen to any more of her excuses. From this moment on, the teacher was banished. Eileen was not to even think of setting foot on Durisan soil again. The teacher immediately demanded to be let go and told Joshua and Selmia to come to their mother. The heroine hugged the twins and began to comfort them, promising that everything would be over soon. However, Eileen continued to struggle, shouting that they couldn't do this to her. But no one listened to her, and the door slammed shut, drowning out the former teacher's screams. It was noisy in the mansion, so Eugenia worried about the children, but they reminded her that she hadn't recovered yet either. Joshua assured her they were fine, so she didn't have to worry about them. So the heroine suggested drinking cocoa before bed, but you're not supposed to drink that at night, so it would be their little secret. Selmia was thrilled, as this meant their big sister would be sleeping with them tonight. This was all thanks to their great aunt on their mother's side. The little one admitted that Miss Eileen had been giving her the creeps for a while now. Whenever Eugenia's name was mentioned, she would immediately get that look on her face and try to separate them. Joshua had guessed something was off, but he didn't expect Miss Eileen to be so possessive, as if they were her own children. The heroine assured the children that they wouldn't have to worry anymore. She would protect them from any harm, so the twins could trust her. Joshua gave an imperceptible nod, while Selmia happily exclaimed that of course they trusted her. Hearing this, the heroine suggested turning off the lights, and Selmia immediately chimed in that she wanted to sleep next to her big sister. Eugenia hugged the little ones, wished them good night, and promised that tomorrow would be even better. The next day, at a meeting, Henrik coldly announced that he could not hide his disappointment. He had arranged this training for these children to grow into outstanding individuals, even bringing in the Empire's top mentors, and yet they dared to mess everything up, even knowing how precious this opportunity was. The barons fully understood the Duke's anger, but they still asked him to calm down, saying it was just children being ignorant. Henrik's tone grew even colder as he told them that someone had almost been seriously injured. Not only did they mess with their parents' belongings, but their fathers, instead of correcting them, covered up their actions. The Duke had made his decision. All training sessions were canceled, and the plan to select an heir from the collateral branches was therefore completely void. The meeting was over. Henrik walked towards the exit, telling everyone to clear out immediately. He would not entrust this family to people who didn't even deserve to be called human. Anyone who did not leave on time would be considered exiled from the family. With that, Henrik dismissed them. A short while later, Elvry told his master that he was truly fed up with dealing with those shameless people. Henrik didn't answer, instead asking his assistant if he had handled that matter. Elvry reported that Miss Eileen had been sent to a convent on the Empire's border as per his orders, and that he would go check on her. The assistant thought to himself that Eugenia was either too kind or too soft-hearted. A few days ago, the girl had personally asked Elvry to give the flower to the teacher so she could handle things herself. But Eugenia insisted that Elvry not say a word to Lord Henrik. Elvry did as the girl asked and told his master he was going back to work now. Opening the door, the assistant noticed an unexpected guest. Without looking up, Henrik asked what the child was doing here. Joshua stood firm and told his uncle he had something to say. The Duke asked what was on his mind, but the young master suddenly became flustered. Mustering his courage, the child blurted out that he wanted to learn swordsmanship too. Henrik promised to find him a fencing instructor, saying that if he wanted to learn, he would pick the best one from the Knights of Heirs. But that wasn't enough for Joshua, because he wanted his uncle to teach him. It was no big deal, but the Duke didn't understand why, and the child immediately said loudly that he wanted to protect the people he cared about. This time he explained how helpless he felt despite his young age, and that was probably the reason. People underestimated him. Eugenia was someone Joshua was close to, but no matter how much he wanted to protect her, he was powerless. So he needed strength now, because he couldn't always be the one who needed saving. The Duke guessed the young master wanted revenge on Bermeline. Joshua declared he wouldn't be played for a fool again, so Henrik decided to ask one last question. Why me? The child crossed his arms and casually replied that it was obvious, because his uncle was the strongest person around. Very well, Henrik said softly, then announced that he would train him personally. So now, Joshua needed to follow him. The boy's face lit up, and he immediately followed his uncle. They first went to the armory, where Henrik let the young master pick any weapon he liked. Joshua made his choice quickly. He wanted to learn to use dual blades. They were Jera's family heirloom, and the child's choice made the Duke think Joshua had good taste. The boy was stunned when his uncle handed him a wooden sword and suggested he start with that. Henrik explained that it was too dangerous to start with real blades, but Joshua was ready to get his hands dirty for Eugenia. With that kind of attitude, the kid would surely become a great swordsman in the future. But rushing things wouldn't make him stronger. Until the day he was worthy of wielding those blades, Henrik would keep them for him. Until then, the Duke was prepared to protect the ones Joshua loved. Clutching the wooden sword, the child assured his uncle that he would do as he said. Henrik smiled slightly and suggested they begin their first lesson. Joshua was taken aback when the man suddenly told him to use the proper address, as he could no longer call him uncle. The young master immediately bowed to his teacher and politely requested his continued guidance. Henrik shook the child's hand, saying he was looking forward to his performance as well. Joshua was stunned when the Duke suddenly told him to run 50 laps around the training ground. Henrik asked if his student couldn't handle it, but Joshua had no intention of backing down. A short while later, the man knocked on a door, announcing his arrival to his dear mother. Hearing her son's voice, Lady Nellie looked up from her book and immediately told Henrik to come in. The Duke was overjoyed and immediately apologized for interrupting her reading, but she quickly reassured him that she was getting bored anyway. They decided to have some tea, and it was then that Henrik explained he had come with only one purpose: to talk to his mother. The thing was, he needed her help and support. Lady Nellie was surprised by Henrik's words, and he added that it was very important, which was why he was asking for her help. The man was very serious, even prepared to beg her. Not once since that day had her son asked for help, and now he needed it. Lady Nellie remembered clearly how she had blamed Henrik for his brother's death that day, all because of that damn horse he had given him. She was so grief-stricken at the time that she couldn't think straight at all. The moment she realized what she had said, she wanted to take back those words, to tell him she didn't mean it at all. But Henrik just lowered his head and mumbled an apology. Then he left the room without another word. Left alone, Lady Nellie realized she had made a huge mistake, an irreversible one. Since then, she could hardly bring herself to look at Henrik. She was busy filling the void left by her husband's death. Every time she saw Henrik, she was afraid she would blame him again out of her grief for Jade. When she calmed down, she felt it was too late, that she had missed her chance, but it seemed she was being too optimistic. Lady Nellie smiled gently and told Henrik to never forget that he was her son, her greatest pride. If there was anything she could do for him, she would help him with all her might. After all, she was his mother, and Henrik was her precious son. The Duke's lips curved into an imperceptible smile as he thanked his mother for her words. Holding her son's hand, the woman told him not to thank her, but to tell her what Henrik wanted to talk about. The man explained that this matter would change the rest of his life. He revealed his plan to the lady, who listened in astonishment. After hearing it, the woman understood why Henrik had jumped into the river last summer. He wanted to save that child. However, she explained that this path would not be an easy one. But Henrik already knew that and had no intention of backing down. It was the only path he could take. The lady smiled and told her son that if he was so determined, then so be it. She understood his resolve, but this was not something to be rushed, so Lady Nellie advised him to calmly think it over again. There was no response from the other side yet. The heroine was surprised to learn that Lady Nellie wanted to send the young Lady Selmia to an estate in the south of the empire. The woman believed that place would be good for Selmia, so now she was eager to hear Eugenia's opinion. However, the heroine thought the opinions of the young lady and young master were more important than hers. Lady Nellie agreed and admitted she had already spoken with the children. Selmia was thrilled. She had never seen the sea and was already looking forward to the trip. But on the other hand, Joshua was unhappy because he wouldn't be able to practice fencing at the estate. The heroine mentally agreed. Joshua had seemed happy lately, and Selma would be better off in the south than here. It was warm there, no need to bundle up in layers. Now that things had calmed down a bit, everyone should do what makes them happy. So Eugenia said she would get everything packed. Lady Nellie suddenly asked if the girl wanted to go with them. An old friend of hers lived in the south, Countess Phoecia, who had left high society after some unpleasantness and was now living in seclusion. Our girl was excited by the offer, but she knew she hadn't found any clues about the fairy queen yet. If Lady Nellie wished for her to go, she would, but the woman told Eugenia that she didn't have to if she didn't want to. Our girl thanked her for her understanding. If the young master stayed behind, he would need someone to look after him. Lady Nellie said that in that case, she would be leaving in a week. For some reason, a flash of sadness crossed our girl's face upon hearing this. Time passed faster than she thought, and before she knew it, 2 weeks had passed since Lady Nellie and Selmia left the Duchy of Harris. As soon as the lady boarded the southbound train, Henrik and Cheyenne started going out together all the time. But because of Joshua's formal lessons, they would return to the mansion once every 3 days. This meant the heroine barely saw them. A small voice kept saying that His Grace the Duke's business would be over soon, to just hang in there a little longer. But who knew when soon would actually arrive? Suddenly, Eugenia heard the head butler clapping his hands. Cedric ordered all the servants to get to their positions at once. An important guest was about to arrive, and there could be no mistakes in their reception. The heroine racked her brain, wondering who it could be that warranted summoning all the servants. The collateral branches of the family wouldn't just show up like this. A stunningly beautiful woman with long, crimson hair crossed the threshold as the butler announced that Her Highness had come from afar. The Grand Princess of the Usher Kingdom thought that everyone was probably surprised by her sudden visit. However, she quite liked this warm welcome. The princess walked towards the butler, remembering his name was Cedric. But looking around, she noticed no one else was there. So Cedric explained that Lady Nellie had gone to the southern estate a few days ago. The princess was sorry to hear that and asked where the Duke was. Just then, Henrik hurried over, apologizing to Her Highness for being late. The princess immediately brightened up, telling him it had been a long time since they'd last met. Then she held out her hand. Henrik averted his gaze and replied that everything was fine. Then he kissed Her Highness's hand, apologizing for his disheveled appearance. The princess smiled and told the Duke not to worry, as they were on good terms. Henrik thanked Her Highness, and then suddenly, a maid standing in the crowd caught his eye. Eugenia looked completely lost, her eyes fixed on the floor. The princess told the Duke he was the same as ever and to just call her Canaria, but Henrik couldn't bring himself to do it. She said he was an old stick in the mud, but admitted that was exactly what she liked about him. Meanwhile, our girl was watching the smiling princess and the Duke. He was listening with rapt attention. Questions began to swirl in her mind. Why was she reacting this way? Were they close? And why should she even care? Mr. Cheyenne suddenly popped up, pulling Eugenia from her thoughts and asking why she was spacing out now. She looked like she was ready to fly into a rage at the next person who bothered her. Eugenia awkwardly brushed it off, saying he was just imagining things. Suddenly, she noticed Henrik was glaring at her and rolled his eyes. She did understand why the Duke was so angry. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. Henrik was stunned when Miss Eugenia blatantly turned her back on him. Mr. Cheyenne couldn't help but laugh, which left the heroine confused. Princess Canaria asked her dear Henrik what he was looking at, but he feigned indifference and said it was nothing. Averting his gaze, he asked Her Highness why she had come unannounced. Canaria explained to Henrik that even if she had sent a letter, he wouldn't have listened. If he had known everything, he would have surely told her not to come. Henrik explained that it would be snowing soon, so it would be best for Her Highness to return quickly before she caught a cold. Canaria didn't think it was a big deal, and besides, she had traveled non-stop without a day's rest just to see Henrik. Couldn't he spare even one night for her? The Duke bowed and explained to the princess that he had been tied up with urgent matters lately and was often away from the mansion. Henrik apologized for not being able to escort Her Highness personally, then bowed and left without waiting for a response. The butler immediately approached the princess, informing her that he would take care of her reception and that she could warm up in the drawing room while her room was being prepared. Canaria hid her displeased expression with her fan, but quickly put on a smile again and asked for some hot tea. The butler immediately went to fulfill her request, and Canaria smiled slyly, saying that since the Duke was so concerned about her, she would return the favor. After his meeting with the princess, Henrik immediately summoned Eugenia before him. The man asked why she wasn't looking at him, and the heroine replied that she was just in a bad mood. Henrik nodded, accepting this answer. Then he moved closer and unexpectedly asked if the girl didn't have any questions for him. Of course, there were questions. Eugenia didn't understand who this girl was or what her relationship with the Duke might be. Why did they seem so close? And was there something going on between Henrik and this guest? But Eugenia only asked if she should be worried about the lady's appearance. Henrik immediately refused, swearing to her that would never happen. The heroine breathed a sigh of relief, managed a faint smile, and said that was enough. But there was something off about her tone and expression. Eugenia then turned to say she had to go, but Henrik stopped her. He called out her name loudly, reminding her that if she could give him some time, he would definitely find a way out of this mess. These were not empty words. Henrik promised that there was truly nothing between him and the princess, and that he had kept it a secret to protect her. The heroine understood perfectly well that Mr. Henrik could easily deal with those rumors, but she couldn't. The man gently took Eugenia's hand, confessing that he didn't want to grow distant from her over something like this. So he almost pleaded with her to give him even a tiny bit of trust in her heart, so that he could be more decisive. Henrik knew very well that he couldn't be too hasty, but he just couldn't control himself. There was always a distance between them, and neither the Duke nor Eugenia could ignore the opinions of others. But Henrik wanted to be closer to her, to laugh together and share the small moments of life, because these feelings were too strong to ignore. The Duke swore he would find a way out. At any cost, the man pulled Eugenia closer, asking her to help him, because only together could they find the answer. The heroine didn't understand why she always tried to handle things alone, because with Henrik, she could make decisions more easily. The Duke intertwined his fingers with hers, asking her to trust him one more time. Eugenia gently caressed his cheek and agreed with him. Then, she confessed to him, saying she had fallen in love with him. Hearing these words, Henrik's breath caught, and his heart began to beat wildly, filled with incredible joy. The man gently lifted Eugenia's chin and slowly moved closer to her. A moment later, their lips met in a long-awaited kiss. The heroine remembered a story Selmia had once read to her, so she took out the brooches from her nightstand. As soon as the girl touched them, the room was illuminated by an extremely bright light, and glowing butterflies appeared around her. The heroine gathered her courage and asked where she needed to return the stones, and learned that the butterflies lived in a deep forest. Then Eugenia asked what the deadline for the return was. The butterflies said that when the next snow falls, the fairy queen will disappear, so she must get there before then. If Eugenia failed to fulfill her promise by then, the blessing the fairy queen gave her would also disappear. This also meant the heroine's life would be shortened next winter. Even though she was alive now, it was all thanks to the queen. The butterfly said it had to go, as it was weak in the winter, and then it vanished into thin air in a dazzling flash of light. The heroine picked up a map and began searching for the forest from her childhood memories, but found nothing. On top of that, Eugenia was wanted by the authorities, and she didn't even know if she could return safely. Even so, Eugenia had managed to arrive safely in the Ace Empire. So she had to start somewhere, even if it was just a small step. The princess's attendant told her that a pair of twins lived in the mansion. Canaria was stunned and asked if they were the Duke and Rico's children. But the attendant explained that they were illegitimate children. The girl had gone to an estate in the south of the empire with Mrs. Nellie to lie low, but the boy had remained here. So Duke Rico personally began to teach him swordsmanship. The princess thought the Duke doted on the child, which meant she could bring him under her wing. The next day, Canaria couldn't understand why she had been running around since dawn. She was exhausted. Joshua was very surprised to see Princess Asher. Canaria handed the child a towel and told him he did a great job. Then the princess confessed that she had come specifically to see Joshua because eating lunch alone was too boring. So she asked the young master if he would be willing to have lunch with her. Looking at Joshua, our heroine felt that he handled hospitality better than she had imagined. The princess suddenly asked for the blonde's name, and Eugenia immediately introduced herself. Canaria decided not to beat around the bush and directly proposed that the maid work for her. The princess sighed dramatically and announced that she needed a maid to serve her during her stay. But our heroine knew very well that this was not a suggestion. It was practically an order from the princess of the entire kingdom. Just then, Henrik came to Eugenia's rescue, telling the princess that she already had a good job. Canaria questioned him, asking if she couldn't even manage such a small thing. The right to assign servants belongs only to the head of the household, Henrik explained. The princess raised her glass and said the Duke was as old-fashioned as ever and no fun to be with. And with that, they went their separate ways. 2 years ago, Canaria Asher had lost the struggle for the throne against her half-brother because he had played dirty. She had intended to accuse her brother of trying to poison her and strike back fiercely, but things quickly took a turn for the worse. It turned out that the poisoning had left some after effects. Just like that, Canaria instantly lost power, and the throne passed to her younger half-brother. When the princess first met Duke Henrik, she immediately felt that things were finally looking up. But now, the way he always protected that blonde was driving her crazy. A few days later, Canaria asked Penny where the Duke was. The maid said he was at the mansion 3 days ago, so he would be back today. If Eugenia was assigned to Joshua, she would have to be here every day. The princess was well aware of this. Soon, Duke Henrik and the young master returned and immediately greeted the princess. Canaria's face lit up at once as she spoke to the man. He was so hard to find. She took a step closer to him, but accidentally tripped and fell right into his arms. Henrik asked if she was all right, saying it was dangerous to wear such shoes on a slippery floor. But Canaria assured him she was fine. However, someone had recommended these shoes to her, saying they were non-slip. The heroine was stunned, as Her Highness the Princess was clearly and brazenly trying to frame her for this. But suddenly, Henrik told Her Highness the Princess that it was his fault. He should have ensured the princess's stay here was flawless. So this mishap was his responsibility. Canaria smiled smugly and said she would let him off this time. She was starting to feel the Duke was too cold, thinking he had forgotten she was the princess of a kingdom. Henrik reminded her that they were no longer engaged. He was leaving again tomorrow, so he asked Her Highness the Princess one last time to leave the mansion. Canaria approached him, saying she completely understood how he felt when he wrote those letters last summer, so she wasn't going anywhere. After a while, the heroine went outside and saw the princess talking to Joshua. The boy wondered if Her Highness the Princess would be bored watching him train, but she said it actually motivated her. But she couldn't stay until the end of training today. She had just stopped by to drop off a gift. Canaria handed the young master a pair of matching swords as a small symbol of their friendship. "This is amazing," Joshua exclaimed, as the gift was too precious for him. The second gift was a blackbird in a cage. The princess explained that this creature was a magical being found in the kingdom of Asher. When the bird flew into the sky and then landed on his shoulder, Joshua couldn't hide his excitement. The child promised he would take good care of it. Without a doubt, it turned out the bird's name was Khosrei. Joshua had found it in a book in Mr. Henrik's study. Eugenia and Joshua went to the library together and also looked up information on magical creatures, but didn't find anything too dangerous. All the truly vicious magical creatures had been dealt with by hunter squads long ago. So what remained now were ones that could be kept as ordinary pets. Harmless pets. This bird was one of them. I bet the princess knew it could be kept as a pet, which is why she gave it to Joshua. The only thing they could find out was that when the Khosrei felt threatened or anxious, its size could grow up to 10 times its original size. If we shatter the gem on its forehead now, we can stop it from transforming. The next morning, the child prepared to train with his new daggers, but Eugenia insisted he use the old ones. The child picked up the new daggers, saying he was old enough to handle them himself. He took out a white cloth and began to wipe the weapons. Accidentally, Joshua's hand was cut by the sharp blade, which terrified the heroine. Suddenly, the birdcage shattered, and the Khosrei's size increased dramatically, and it was clearly no longer docile. The heroine was speechless. She didn't understand what was happening, as they had never been told this was a possibility. To prevent the giant bird from harming Joshua, Eugenia charged forward to attack. She managed to buy a few seconds, enough to run to Joshua's side and check on him. But the Khosrei appeared in an instant, and the child pushed Eugenia away as the bird's sharp claws slashed across his shoulder blade. Realizing what had just happened, Eugenia looked at the boy lying there, horrified. She scooped him up and desperately fled from the dangerous bird. But the only nearby place was a walk-in closet, and now the heroine was trapped. Meanwhile, the butler and young master Cheyenne heard a strange commotion from the room and rushed over to see what was happening. They pushed open the door and immediately saw the giant bird. Cheyenne started shouting Joshua's and Eugenia's names, knowing they must be nearby. The heroine's voice came from the closet, telling him that young Master Joshua was badly injured. Cheyenne didn't waste another second and immediately drew his sword. But the Kosrae was now fully grown, so the young master's sword shattered upon hitting its head. The man realized that the bird probably only reacted to the smell of blood, which meant its target was clear. The heroine heard Lord Cheyenne's voice telling her she had to shatter the stone on the Kosrae's forehead now. Eugenia grabbed a broken clothes hanger, realizing that if she didn't do it, no one could save Joshua at this moment. So she charged forward and pierced the stone on the giant beast's forehead. The Kosrae immediately shrank, and the heroine realized she had actually done it. First, Eugenia placed Joshua on the bed and tried to wake him. But due to the severe injury, the child had lost too much blood, and the heroine prepared some herbs for him. Joshua swallowed the medicine, enduring the intense pain. Just then, the princess entered the room, saying she had heard the commotion and asked what had happened. Seeing Her Highness, Eugenia immediately and angrily questioned why she had given Joshua such a dangerous gift. However, Canaria replied that she had already told him to be careful, saying that the Kosrae would become uncontrollable at the sight of blood. Her attendant defended the princess, saying it wasn't Her Highness's fault if the maid hadn't heard clearly. Canaria told the butler that she had given enough chances, so it was time to take action. The heroine froze when Cedric ordered the guards to lock her in the storage room immediately. Eugenia had been locked up for 2 days, and all she could think about was whether Joshua was okay. It was obvious the princess wanted to shift the blame onto Eugenia to escape accountability for what had happened. But it seemed she knew how the bird would react to blood. Suddenly, the heroine realized she had been the princess's target from the very beginning. Just then, Canaria appeared in the storage room and spoke sarcastically to Eugenia. She looked terrible. The princess feigned concern, saying it broke her heart that a lovely child like Joshua was hurt, so she had found a way to heal him. Canaria handed Eugenia a piece of paper with a drawing of the flower of eternal goodness, which could neutralize any poison. The heroine knew of this flower. Many had searched for it, but no one had ever found it, so it had become a legend. The princess gripped Eugenia's chin, demanding she bring the flower back, and then she would forgive her transgression. Right now, saving Joshua was the top priority. If someone claimed to have seen the flower, it must exist, right? Eugenia remembered the fairy queen's blessing, which allowed her to hear the whispers of every blade of grass. So the heroine agreed to take on the task, just in case. She picked up the fairy queen's stone, which could show her the location of the ice flower. Before the girl left, the butler handed her something. It was easy to get lost in the snowy mountains. It was a mountain thread, woven from the hair of a magical beast and indestructible. The heroine thanked the butler for his kindness and told him not to worry too much. Then she set off to find the legendary flower, determined to return and save Joshua.